We call it Black Sunday in college football. Black Sunday, at least as of about 3:30 Eastern time, is pretty mild at this point, but still some major shakeup across the country. And most notably, big changes at Wisconsin. And unless somebody else saw this coming, and I didn't see it reported anywhere, again, another major job completely comes out of nowhere in regards to how the vacancy, who fills the vacancy, and how that all came about. Wisconsin, and then, of course, Stanford looking for a new head coach now after 12 seasons. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Following rivalry week, we dive right into the offseason to a certain extent. No, it's not the offseason on the field, but for a number of programs, it's the offseason. And the offseason going to be even more meaningful for those programs than what just transpired over the last 3 months on the season, because they were programs not going anywhere, programs that needed new direction, that needed new leadership, that needed a new spark and new direction in this ever-changing landscape of college football. So we have learned today that Luke Fickell, the most successful Group of Five head coach at the very top of the list, it's not even in question. He has succeeded the most in the Group of Five over the past 5 to 6 seasons at Cincinnati. Leaving Cincinnati, he's had job offers all over the place. And he has decided that Wisconsin is the one that is acceptable and attractive to him to move forward in his coaching career. Of course, the shakeup in the Big Ten Western Division also involves Nebraska naming Matt Rule the other day as head coach, and he will be introduced and will meet the media and the fans on Monday, and we will have coverage here at the Voice of College Football on our Nebraska show on Monday at 6 Eastern and 5 Central with Greg Peterson from Husker Online to discuss Matt Rule and his new job at Nebraska. But again, the big news of the day in the Big Ten and across the nation in college football, Luke Fickell leaves Cincinnati to go to Wisconsin. I'll give you my thoughts in just a second as we take calls. And of course, David Shaw, a very intriguing and quite a tumultuous stay at Stanford from the standpoint of football results. Not tumultuous in regards to his conduct or his standards or his behavior, because that was rock solid. David Shaw is one of the most respected coaches and individuals in college athletics, respected across the country, and one of the reasons why I believe he was able to maintain and keep his job for this long. But to look at his tenure at Stanford, very uneven, very perplexing. And we will dive more into that a little bit later. But David Shaw, at the age of 50, has decided to step down at Stanford. He did not say whether he wants to coach again. He just made the statements that Stanford is a place where you can win big. But he did also acknowledge that in this changing landscape of college football, meaning transfer portal, NIL, I don't think there's any question that Stanford is one of the more difficult places to win, considering those components being introduced to college football. And David Shaw has had a rough time trying to do just that, win at Stanford over the past 4 to 5 seasons. Stanford, in the past 10 years under David Shaw, has gone from elite program, top 5, contending for national championships, to 8-4, go to bowl games, compete in the Pac-12, to one of the worst football teams in the country in the Power 5. All right, let's get to your calls. And before we hear from all of you, keep in mind it's Christmas season. Most of you are starting your shopping. We know that. Please use the Amazon link in the description section of all the videos. Grab the Amazon link, put it somewhere where you will remember it and have it for your shopping. Doesn't cost you a penny, and it's the same shopping experience, so why not grab the link that we provide for Amazon, and when you go on Amazon to do your Christmas shopping or any shopping, of course, A portion of that goes to the Voice of College Football, and that doesn't come out of your pocket. That comes out of Amazon's pocket. So how about that? All right, let's tee it up here at the Voice of College Football. And our first call of the day. Hello.
Hey, Mark, it's Michael. How you doing?
Michael, how you doing today? What's going on?
Good. Sorry about last night. Sometimes my earbuds don't want to cooperate.
Oh, that's all right. We all suffer from technology, that's for sure.
Yep. I'm still trying to wrap my mind and stuff like that, even though I did say that back in August and stuff like that Purdue was going to win the West.
Yeah, Purdue in the Big Ten championship game. How about that?
Yep. And stuff like that. I think it's going to be an interesting game and stuff like that. Do I think Purdue's going to win? No. Would I like to see him win? Yes. But it's just going to have to do like they may think is they're going to have to do better on the run defense like they did yesterday. But granted, they gave up all this stuff in the first half, but they only gave up like 49 yards in the second half and stuff like that, forced them to pass and stuff like that. I just wonder, teams haven't really thrown on Michigan this year and stuff like that. So how good is their secondary?
They just faced arguably the best passing offense in the country yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm saying before that. Before
like that. So,
yeah.
I would think that Maryland's passing game is comparable to Purdue's.
Mm-hmm.
Penn State.
Okay. Stuff like I can see that and stuff like I see some Michigan games on them. But what's the one thing that Purdue has to do offensively to have a chance against Michigan? Does McAbee have to have a good game rushing the ball to force Michigan to maybe play a little bit of different defenses and stuff?
The most important aspect of this game for Purdue on offense is to block.
Mm-hmm.
If they can block, they've got a chance.
Okay.
That's the biggest question. I'm not concerned about Devin McAbee. I'm not concerned about the wide receivers. I'm not concerned about Aiden O'Connell. If they all have enough room and space to do what they do, they'll be fine. Mm-hmm. They can succeed against the Michigan defense. If they have time and room and space, protection, all of that, then they can move the ball against Michigan. Mm-hmm. And that's not because Michigan doesn't have a great defense. That's because Aiden O'Connell's the second or third best quarterback in the Big Ten, and he's one of the top 10 or 15 quarterbacks in the nation, and he's good enough to carve up any secondary if given the time, and the wide receivers are capable. It's a top 3 to 4 room in the Big Ten, and Devin McAbee as well. So they're all good enough to have big days against Michigan if the blocking up holds up.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the 17.5 a little bit too big, or is that what you expected for the spread?
I didn't take a guess on it. Didn't even have time today to think about it. I've been gone all day and have not had a chance to think about football at all until this very second. So I did not give it any thought. 17.5 is probably what I would have guessed, and that seems pretty fair.
Mm-hmm. And stuff like that. But one thing I'm trying to figure out is, is there a chance they might leapfrog Georgia to be number 1 come Tuesday with a dominating performance yesterday?
I think it's extremely debatable as to whether Georgia or Michigan is number 1. I don't think there is a clear-cut number 1. You could make a case for Michigan that's valid. You can make a case that winning in Columbus by 3 scores is the best result in the nation, in the country, for the entire season. And you can make a case that dominating Penn State, a top 10 team in the country, those 2 wins are better than anything Georgia's put up there. On the Georgia side, you can, of course, argue that they play in the best conference in college football and most likely the best division, and they have a deeper list of wins than Michigan does.
Mm-hmm. A couple other things. One, regardless of what happens Saturday, what bowl game do you see Purdue getting? As of now, do you think they can get the Outback or the Gator Bowl, or is it the Citrus Bowl now?
Well, I do think that the outcome of the game is going to affect their standing, going to affect their slotting, possibly. So Purdue sits at 8-4. They go to 9-4 with a win, and Penn State sitting at 10-2. So Penn State's still probably safe for a New Year's Six. So that slots Purdue in the 4th spot in the Big Ten Bowl tiers. So down to the Citrus Bowl. But if they lose the game, they go to 8-5. They probably still maintain that status. So maybe it won't matter. I don't know. I don't have the bowl tie-ins in front of me, but I got to think that that's, there's the bowl tie-ins are directly related to a record.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those bowl sponsors have some leeway to leapfrog if it's within a game, if it's reasonable, they can leapfrog to grab a team or a brand that they'd rather have in their bowl game. But I don't think that there's that situation in the Big Ten right now.
Yeah. Last thing before I let you go is if we see Purdue and the Giant Killers like they did to Iowa, Michigan State last year, and to Ohio State a couple years ago, could that pretty much knock Michigan out of the college football playoff? And if that's the case, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
I don't think so. I see your point, and I think it should be considered that if Michigan loses a Big Ten championship game to an 8-4 team, that but this is a year that's unlike other years. There's not a lineup of teams that are going to win conference championships that can grab that spot. The ACC has played its way out of it. And if USC loses, then the Pac-12 is gone, but we don't expect that. There's not 2 teams in the SEC unless there's enough chaos to reach down to Alabama. So I expect that Michigan's going to maintain its spot in the college football playoff. It's just going to change the seeding if they lose. I think they're in and Georgia's in.
Do you think TCU's in regardless of what happens?
No.
So if both of them loses, both USC and TCU loses, they'll both be out. Then you think?
Well, I think that USC is going to be out for sure. They're going to have a second loss. TCU still has a fighting shot. I think you've got Georgia and Michigan, and then TCU if they lose, and USC loses. Wow, then you're opening it up for Ohio State and Alabama.
Yeah,
possibly get selected. Now TCU is going to get more consideration than USC because it's simply a first loss as opposed to USC. USC's done if they lose. TCU is still under consideration, but that gives the committee an opportunity to go to other places for those 2 spots, just making the claim that TCU lost its conference championship game. We've seen 2 teams lose conference championship games and still make the playoffs. Notre Dame in 2020 and Georgia last year. So it's possible.
Yeah, I was wondering stuff like that too. All right, I'm surprised about Luke Fickell. That really surprised me. But as far as Stanford, who do you see could be a potential front runner?
Oh boy, I have not given that any thought. I would look around the nation for your top coordinators and your top group of 5 head coaches. I'd have to look into the backgrounds of like Jamie Chadwell. I don't know if Lance Leipold would consider that an upgrade. Yeah, I got to say, I started this stream, I rushed in, and boom, here we go. And I haven't given that any thought whatsoever. None.
Was this expected, or did it catch you off guard as a surprise about Shaw?
I thought David Shaw might. It didn't catch me off guard. I thought that David Shaw was probably on the hot seat, and if it was any other coach in the nation, that he would have been fired. But David Shaw has a lot of equity there. He has a lot of attachments there, and he's well respected not only there but all over the place. So he, like Pat Fitzgerald, are getting a lot more rope. He did seem, I don't want to read into this too much. I don't want to make too much of this or make it sound like I try to not read body language and read into things, but he has seemed a bit Not that he hasn't done a nice job and hasn't invested himself, but he has seemed a bit disinterested in recent years. And obviously, it's going terribly. It's going the wrong direction, regardless of what he says. So it didn't surprise me.
Right,
I just didn't know whether he was going to leave or they were going to let him go.
All right, then, sir. Yep, it's going to be fun and stuff like this week's going to be fun and crazy. But anyway, thanks for taking my call, Mark. Have a great one.
Thank you, Michael.
See you.
Appreciate it. All right. Next up here at the Voice of College Football, let's see who we've got on the line. Dave's here.
Hey,
Dave.
The funny thing is, right when I get back home to Minneapolis, I find out that Fickell is going to Wisconsin. I'm gonna have to say for of all the schools, I thought that would be the one school that he's gonna probably do well at, and also the one school that I didn't think he would be on his list, actually, in some ways. I thought he probably would go to somewhere like Auburn or Florida. Or even stay at Cincinnati, and because Cincinnati will be in the Big 12 next year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I thought that could be the one thing that would keep him there. That Cincinnati now goes from being a G5 to a Power 5, and his reasoning would be, okay, now I have a legitimate path to the playoff, and we're going to be respected and included in this process. But I don't know that I've ever heard Luke Fickell make this statement, but it seems to be well-founded that he wants to stay in the Midwest. Now, whatever you consider the Midwest to be, it obviously extends up to Wisconsin for him and all the way down to Cincinnati. So to make a move from Cincinnati to Wisconsin seems like it's pretty much of a stark contrast to me, but it is well known out there that he wanted to stay in a certain part of the country, and Wisconsin was obviously within that part of the country. And he's a Big Ten guy, played in the Big Ten, coached in the Big Ten. So he's going to be in the Big Ten. And
so where did he coach?
I don't remember, but he's probably going to get a substantial bump in pay.
Yeah. The Wisconsin is definitely paying him a lot of money to probably come there. A lot of money. He'll probably be like the third highest Big Ten paid coach right now.
Yes. Luke Fickell was making $5 million a year at Cincinnati. That's pretty good for a group of 5 coach.
Yeah, and he's probably going to get that doubled at Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think that might be a little high, but
okay, maybe like
8 or 9.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's awakening. It's awakening to a lot of schools, especially for his rival schools, Minnesota and Wisconsin, or Minnesota and Iowa, and Wisconsin has not had recently in the last 5 years. They have not done well against Iowa, and they have not done well against Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota has now won 2 in a row, which is something that hasn't happened in a long time against Wisconsin. And they definitely Wisconsin really pulled the trigger and really needed to get a coach that they felt that would get them to that next level. They've always been on that almost there, but not quite there level where they can compete for almost a national championships. But that's pretty much it. I'm surprised. I didn't even know who the heck Nebraska got. I don't even know the guy. And I know that they were, a lot of fans from Nebraska were kind of upset that Fickell went to Wisconsin instead of maybe Nebraska.
You're not familiar with Matt Rule?
Not totally. No.
Okay.
No,
He's a good coach. It's a good hire. I think Wisconsin did better. I think Wisconsin did as well as they possibly could have. I think this is a great hire.
Oh, this is a great hire for Wisconsin. This is I would be surprised if Wisconsin, doesn't win. Well, if there is a West, it's not going to be a West Division, so we can't really. Well, maybe next year they'll probably win the West. Probably the favorites. I hate to say that because I kind of hoping that the Gophers eventually would get over that hump, but it's concerning as a Gopher fan. It's definitely concerning. But I can only worry about my team and not whoever hires whoever. So,
well, it's kind of a catch-22 because you want your team to win and you don't want to see other teams grabbing the best coaches in the country. But at the same time, if you want your conference to be strong, then you better have better coaches than other conferences.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we only have probably 4 really good, considered well coaches for what they have to do. Harbaugh definitely is probably the number 1 best coach right now, in my opinion, in the Big Ten. And then the Ohio State coach, don't really even know his name offhand. We don't play Ohio State enough for me to to follow them enough. I know he's really good. And then, traditionally you have, Kurt Ferris, which I think he's probably, maybe if he didn't quit this year, next year he'll be done. Especially if Iowa's offense still stays stagnant.
Yep. All right, Dave.
All right.
Appreciate
have a nice day.
Yeah. Have a good day. Thanks for calling.
I'm going to go at least take a nap now. I just got back, literally just got back.
There you go. Have a good one. Get some sleep.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Appreciate the comments and the questions coming in. This is funny. So I don't know how many people, have made this comment to me that obviously, and I don't expect all of you to understand our scheduling here, but it doesn't change. Regardless of who wins or loses, I do the same thing. I think I've pretty much established that I am consistent in, I have a schedule, and if Ryan Day got fired today, I'd be going on live talking about Ryan Day getting fired. Just like David Shaw left Stanford and Luke Fickell's leaving Cincinnati for Wisconsin, we're live. When Mark D'Antonio left Michigan State, when Mark Richt left Miami, when Manny Diaz was hired at Miami, when Willie Taggart got fired at Florida State, when Mike Norvell was hired, we could go through every major coaching situation in the country. I'm here. And when it comes to the game schedule, that doesn't change. It was so amusing to me how many people hit me up on Twitter thinking that I was running or scared or hiding because Ohio State lost a football game. That's just ludicrous to me. Number one, I've been here after every Ohio State loss, like I always am. I was here for 3 hours and 10 minutes last night, talking about Ohio State and Michigan most of the time because that's what people wanted to talk about. I am the last person online who runs from anything. It's a football game. Like, nobody's going to take me down a dark alley and beat me to death. It's not hard. It's not a difficult thing to talk about your team losing and the college football situation. And this is what I do. It's a business. It is a business. I would be a moron to not just follow through with my schedule. In addition to being just kind of cowardice for no reason, I would be a complete idiot to not follow through on my schedule. So our schedule on Saturday is how many post-game shows after specific games have I done this year? The answer is 0. So we didn't do anything different yesterday than we've done every week. I come on at halftime of the noon game and the 3:30 game. I've done this for like the last 6 weeks, regardless of the games, because I've seen the response. So I'm like, okay, people like when I jump on at halftime. We can do a quick 15 minutes live, and we'll do it during the conference championship games. Absolutely. But after the game is over, if you've noticed, we've built out a network of post-game shows. So we've got an Ohio State post-game show. We've got a Michigan post-game show. And so I'm not going to come on here and compete directly with them talking about the same game. And then I'm here for 3 hours on Saturday night. So that is just amusing to me that people were making comments to me on Twitter. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Like, do you really think that that I would be impacted by the results of a game in terms of the way I run my business? Whew. Okay. Next up here at the Voice of College Football, who's on the line?
How's it going, Mark?
I'm good. What's going on?
Not much. I'm actually not. To be honest with you, with the Wisconsin hire, I thought it came down to 2 people.
Okay.
I thought it was Lance Leopold and Jim Leonard, because knowing Wisconsin, they always keep stuff in house.
Yep.
I actually kind of like the Luke Fickell hire.
Yeah.
From his side and Wisconsin, they just like, let's try something different. He's a proven winner in the big. He did a babysitting job when Jim Trussell got fired. But I understand Luke Fickell's point. Cincinnati's going to the Big 12 next year, and so he's probably like, I kind of don't like that because SMU played TCU, and TCU smacked them around, so he's probably like, yeah. And plus, there's uncertainty in the Big 12 since they lost their 2,
Sure.
I understand that. So he's probably looking around, and in my opinion, with all this.
Well, Wisconsin's just a better job than Cincinnati. It's just not debatable.
I
don't know that I think the Big 12 has improved its status. Not losing Texas and Oklahoma, but after losing Texas and Oklahoma, I think the Big 12 did everything it possibly could. I think it made the best 4 additions that it possibly could to stabilize the league. I think the league is fine.
And then another coach, the Kenny Dillingham, I kind of like that. It's kind of he took the Arizona State job. I kind of like that. But the Auburn one, have they finalized the deal with Hugh Freeze yet?
Well, that seems to be what's reported out there, is that it's finalized. Even ESPN is reporting that they're close to finalizing. So it seems as though it's just about done.
Oh, that is one job I would not want to take because of the boosters.
Yeah, why are the boosters any worse at Auburn than anywhere else?
The Gus Malzahn, they try to fire him like 6 times.
Sure.
And he always, it seems like that year that he always was trying to get fired, he won the Iron Bowl. So they're like, oh, we forgive you. Here's extensions. And
yeah.
The Brian Harsin thing, obviously, I knew that wasn't going to work. He's a West Coast guy going to Auburn. You knew that wasn't going to end well. But
yeah, it was a bit odd.
I do like the
odd match.
Yeah, and I do like Matt Rule in Nebraska. He just kind of brings that toughness, and I think Nebraska actually kind of needs the discipline and the toughness. And also, do you think the Nebraska moving to the Big Ten kind of hurt their reputation? Because I still picture them as a Big 12 school.
I don't think it hurts their reputation. It hurts their recruiting, and it hurts their fit.
Yeah, just
they fit in the Big 12. People look at geography and they see Nebraska with Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, Texas schools, Oklahoma schools, Missouri. That's what it's been forever, and it makes geographic sense. And it's not just geographic sense, just from a lifestyle standpoint and a brand and marketing and just everything. It just fits versus coming to the Big Ten and suddenly they're at the outer regions of the Big Ten. And certainly there's a connection between Nebraska and Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin. So that's not a stretch, but I think it changed their recruiting footprint. I don't think that high school players in Texas wanted to go to Nebraska to play in the Big Ten and play Minnesota and Iowa and Northwestern versus staying in the Big 12 and going to Nebraska and playing Oklahoma and Texas schools.
And I also understood why David Shaw left. I think he understands the limitations of recruiting at Stanford. Like, they cannot get early enrollees. I mean, their academic standards. I'm a Notre Dame fan, and people complain about us getting recruits, obviously, but Stanford, that's a whole nother level. And he even said in his presser, like, I'm resigning. Like, he knows that players will transfer, and they can't really get transfers because, I mean, it's Stanford, for heaven's sakes. And I was watching that game actually, and you could see that he was looking around, and like he looked like he just obviously didn't want to be there. I think he was just soaking it all in. I would actually like to see him on like covering the NFL draft or doing like TV broadcasting. I think he'd be excellent at that.
Yeah. As you know, he's already done it.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He's really good. He's really smart. He's a great communicator. Yes.
And like, I didn't think
he will be doing that.
And he resigned, like you said, I think he's been there 16 years. And
16 total. Yep.
Yeah, and then he kind of, like, when Harbaugh left for the 49ers, he kind of inherited Harbaugh stuff, and then he kind of, I mean, up and down roller coaster, but I think
that's what made it difficult for me to evaluate and rank David Shaw as a coach, was that he basically maintained what Harbaugh built for 4 or 5 years, and then they found a new level, which was much lower, more of a fringe top 25 team. And now in the last 4 years, they've been awful.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at the recruiting rankings, to your point, they're almost dead last the last couple of years in the transfer portal. The high school recruiting's not been bad. They were 27th in the country last year. They're 30th right now in this recruiting class. And that's pretty much what Stanford does at its best. But the transfer portal losses and the lack of gains, which is basically nets last in the country in the transfer portal, weighs that recruiting ranking way down. And unless they change something, they're not going to be able to compete.
Oh, and obviously I have to congratulate all the USC fans. I'm a Notre Dame fan, and I'm happy for the USC actually, they're back to being what they were. I think it's actually healthy for college football, and I think it'd be kind of cool to see them in the playoffs. But right now, what are your, like, where would you rank USC, like, in the top 4? I mean, what are your top 4 rankings when it comes out Tuesday, correct?
Yeah. So are you wanting to know how I would rank them or what I think the committee's going to do?
Actually, I'll take both.
All right. So the committee is going to make a decision between Georgia and Michigan, but I don't think Michigan's win was so, if they're actually watching the games, which they're supposed to, it wasn't a 3-score win in a classic 3-score way. It was a tightly contested game until the last 8 or 9 minutes of the game. And Georgia, I just don't think that they're going to take Georgia out of the 1 spot. I don't think there was enough power shift there, performance difference, that they're going to displace Georgia. So I think Georgia's 1, Michigan's 2. And then TCU had a extremely strong effort against a bad team, but still did what you would expect them to do. So I would think that they would elevate TCU to 3, and then USC's number 4. I think it's pretty clear cut. I just don't even think it's that debatable right now.
That's what you think. And what would you rank it?
I usually would have my rankings released by now, but once I get to them, I'm going to do a deep dive on Georgia and Michigan's schedules. I do think that Michigan has 2 better wins than Georgia's wins, but Georgia's got a deeper list of strong wins. So Georgia and Michigan are going to be 1 and 2 in some order. And then TCU, I've had them at 2 or 3 in the country. So they're going to be at 3, and USC at 4. It's pretty, I don't have a big issue with where I think they're going to be on the top 4. Now, after that, in terms of who's in play to replace 1 or 2 of them if they lose, USC or TCU, they're going to show their hand as to whether they're going to drop Ohio State beneath Alabama or keep them in front of Alabama, because obviously neither one of those teams are playing this weekend. So they are showing their hand as to if TCU or USC, especially USC, loses, then that next team is going to be the one to fill that spot.
I forgot who's UC Southern Cal playing.
Utah.
Utah. That'd be an interesting game.
Yeah, they lost by 1 point on the road.
Are you gonna? Who do you think would? Are you picking Utah or USC this time?
I think USC is playing much better football right now than Utah.
Yeah, I'd give Caleb Williams the Joe Moore offensive line trophy. Just chip it to him with the Heisman, because he made us look dumb.
Yeah.
But
if he's not the quarterback, maybe Notre Dame wins that game.
Yeah, maybe if we didn't throw a stupid interception or Pine fumbled it, but
yeah, Pine played really well, but he made mistakes that really cost you.
Our defense just didn't. I mean, we were letting our wide receivers have 10 yards of space and just stuff that Al Golden kept making me mad. We kept blitzing our linebackers, but it's like, no, quit doing that. They know it's coming. And our running back, Estime, should have got the ball more, because I think he had 7 carries, 43 yards, but his average was 7.2. Tommy Reese tries to get too cute with his offensive plays. Like the 4th and 1. Yeah, we did the Mitchell Evans, Travis Kelce package, which USC knew that was coming. But yeah, it was a terrible. Just the play calling and we didn't show up on defense. But I'm not.
Yeah, well, that's a tough team to show up on defense against. I thought Notre Dame was on the brink of getting blown out a number of times during that game, but they didn't. They hung in, and when it was 31-21 before Pine threw that pick, I thought there was still some hope.
Yeah. And people are bashing Drew Pine. What more do you want that kid to do? He's 15 or 15. Like, I'm not going to lie, he's not the most talented quarterback, but we do have a 4-star Kenny Minchie coming in, and we have CJ Carr coming in 2024. So it's like our recruiting is getting better. But
oh, absolutely. Your recruiting's phenomenal.
I think we have a top 3 recruiting class this year and next year so far, but you never know. So I personally want to thank you for having me on, Mark. And
well, thanks for being here.
Yep,
I appreciate the conversation.
Yep, no problem.
Call back anytime.
Absolutely.
All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. We did have some super chats come in. I'm so appreciative of that. Thank you for that. We've got Congo. Wear the winged football helmet at Mark. Wear the winged football helmet at Mark. We're talking about Wisconsin and Stanford coaching changes. Okay. It's where's the winged helmet? It's back here. You know what? Here, Congo. There, it's across the room now. There you go. All right, that's where it's at. It's across the room against the wall. All right. Next up, I thought I saw some other super chats. Appreciate that. I don't have my contacts in. We've got an issue there. Erica, thank you so much for being here. As always, as a Hawkeye fan, it's infuriating to me to see all these teams making coaching changes while we keep our cruddy offensive coaches. We deserve better. Erica, I don't know what to tell you. If that's not a fireable offense, the way your offense has looked and performed and produced over the past few seasons, Indiana fired its offensive line coach. Indiana's offensive standards are the standards of Indiana football in terms of competing for championships anywhere close to Iowa's? No. It's not debatable. Iowa's a top 15 to 25 program in the country. Indiana's whatever. Doesn't even matter. 50, 60, whatever they are. They don't compete for anything and haven't forever. I understand they had a good season in 2020. Wow. But Indiana football's awful. Iowa football is respectable. They have the 6th highest number of NFL players in the league right now. So, but they do it all on special teams and on defense. And they've got an offensive coordinator who's been there now for 6 years. Usually these guys get about 2 years, and if they can't do anything with it, see ya. Bye. But he's got a certain last name, so he's still there. Erica, thank you so much for the super chat. That's very kind of you. Thank you for being here. And of course, we've got our Hawkeyes live show every Tuesday at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central on the Iowa channel. Yes, Brian Ferentz should be fired. The offense is dismal and deplorable and horrible beyond belief, and has been for a long, long time. Yes, Indiana fires an offensive line coach mid-season. Guy's not getting the job done. I don't know the details, but Rutgers, again, compare the standards of Iowa football and Rutgers football. Rutgers has a better offense than Iowa's actually. Not much, but a little bit better. They fired their offensive coordinator mid-season. All right. Preem, thanks for being here. Appreciate that. Preem Sports. You're a true professional and stand-up guy, Mark. Yesterday proves that. Well, of course, I'm here regardless of what the results are. Truth be known, I've said this a number of times, part of me, just a little bit of me, wishes that either I wasn't an Ohio State fan or Ohio State wasn't as good as they are. Let's say Ohio State was Texas Tech. Okay. Completely inconsequential toward the landscape of college football, the playoffs, all of that. Inconsequential. They're going 5-7 one year, 7-5 the next year, 4-8, 6-6, 5-7. They're Texas Tech. Then I could be on here, Texas Tech fan. Okay, nobody would care. Everybody would be like, okay, he likes Texas Tech. Nobody wants to talk about Texas Tech. And I would proceed to analyze college football and everybody that's in playoff contention and all of that. That would be great. I would love that, because the way things stand right now, I am, of course, not going to give up my fandom. I've been an Ohio State fan since I was 8 years old. I'm not going to give that up. But at the same time, I have to just deliver the facts and the truth, and then let the people that watch me on a regular basis be like, oh yeah, okay, we recognize he comes at this from a neutral standpoint, is unbiased, does his very best to be unbiased. It's impossible to be unbiased. I will argue that point with anyone. It's impossible to be unbiased, to be completely unbiased. You can do everything you possibly can to be unbiased, as I do, but it's impossible to be completely unbiased. Even understand, if you're watching a game that you don't even care about, you have bias. So if you're an Alabama fan and you're watching Washington and Oregon play, do you know what? You actually have a bias. You may not care about either team, but You have a perspective on the game that's not perfectly accurate, so you have a bias. And obviously, if you're an Alabama fan and you're watching the Alabama-Auburn game, you've got a bias, even if you're going to analyze the game after the game. And that bias may be that you're too hard on your own team, but that's a bias. And it's usually going to be that you're too lenient on your team, or you believe you overrate your team, you overrank them, you're going to overrank their place in history, all those things, because you're going to come to the defense of your team, your program. I don't think anything proves this more than take a controversial play in college football history. Take the Miami-Ohio State last play of the Fiesta Bowl that helped determine the national championship. It did not determine the national championship. But anyway, if you took a group of neutral college football fans and had them watch that play, let's say it's 50-50. It's a 50-50 split. 50% say it's interference, 50% say it's not interference. Let's say that. Okay. Or you can do this with any play in the history of sports that's controversial. If you take then 1,000 Ohio State fans and you take 1,000 Miami fans and they both watch that play, what's going to happen? Almost every Ohio State fan is going to determine a certain thing, and almost every Miami fan is it's going to be like 99%. Well, are their eyes not working? No, they're biased. They're biased, so they see things the way they want to see them. Okay, Preem Sports, thank you so much for that. I appreciate you being here. And we'll take the next call in just a second. We've got another super chat coming in. We appreciate you. DC Quadruple X. This is the last year that Ohio State and the Half Natties are our daddy. The last. Thanks for all you do on your channel. So we got a Penn State fan who is sick of it. Sick of the Half Natty Michigan Wolverines. He's, of course, going back to 1997, and Ohio State owning the Big Ten. Well, Ohio State owned the Big Ten for a long time. Basically since 2002, definitely since 2005, Ohio State's just flat out owned the Big Ten, unlike anybody's owned any conference, aside from, of course, Clemson during the playoff era and Oklahoma before the playoff era. But now, officially, in my book, we could have this debate, but in my book, in my estimation, that switched yesterday. It somewhat switched last year, of course. If Michigan wins the game on the field and wins the Big Ten championship, they are the Big Ten champion. They are number one in the Big Ten. But most of us had a thought that, okay, like to see that again. Would like to see that happen again. It needs to happen again, especially considering that Ohio State is beating everybody else, and it's only happened once, and the recruiting rankings tell us that Ohio State's still better. Got to see it again. Well, we saw it again. So, in my estimation, the number one program in the Big Ten is Michigan. Those are the facts. That's the truth as I see it. I will have a discussion with anyone who would like to have that discussion. To me, Clemson is still the best program in the ACC. In the SEC, I think that's an interesting debate between Alabama and Georgia. But if Georgia will win again on Saturday, I would say, you know what? Georgia is they're the national champion, going for another national championship. They won the SEC this year. They're the best program in the SEC. But it's close. I understand the Alabama debate, that viewpoint. The Big 12, there's not a best program in the Big 12. Obviously, TCU is the best team right this second, but I don't see a best program in the Big 12. It was Oklahoma until Lincoln Riley left, and now they're 6-6. And then in the Pac-12, I don't know that there's a best program. It looks like it's USC coming on fast to take it over, but they haven't proven it. All right. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, do you hear me?
Hey, McD, what's going on?
Yeah, it's McD Sports 4. So obviously I'm very surprised by the Luke Fickell hire at Wisconsin. I saw a report saying he's getting $9 million a year.
Well, that would do it. He was getting 5 at Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's a big upgrade. But the reason why Luke Fickell left for Cincinnati for Wisconsin has to do everything to do with money. The Big Ten and SEC, I know SEC fans will think that the SEC is better than the Big Ten. They're going to be the top 2 conferences when conference realignment happens, when the Pac-12 gets fleeced, because that's what's going to happen, and when basically the new TV contracts start kicking in with this college football playoff expansion. When it expands to 12 teams, it's going to be 10 out of those 12 teams, or 8, I'll lower it a little bit. 8 out of those 12 teams are going to either come out of the Big Ten or the SEC. You have 2 or 3 come out of the Big 12, and then 1 or 2 come out of the ACC.
Well, wait a minute. You're going to have 1 come out of the group of 5.
Well, technically 2, actually.
Technically 2?
Because isn't it the top 6 conference winners?
Oh, yeah, so you've got the top 6 conference champions, sure. So that's 1 team out of the group of 5.
I got it down as 2. I think the Pac-12 is going to be extinct. But
okay. I don't believe so. Not the way things stand right now, but things can change.
From everything I'm reading, it looks
so anyway, like your point is that the Big Ten and the SEC are going to dominate the number of playoff teams.
Yeah,
I get that.
And there's going to be a lot of money coming in. This move has everything to do with money, and that's why Luke Fickell went to Wisconsin. In my opinion, it has nothing to do with, or he's trying to run away from the Big 12. Because there's a story going around, and someone alluded to it, like, oh, we saw TCU beat up on SMU. You think Luke Fickell's scared of TCU?
Yeah. So somebody else made that comment, another caller, and then they kept going, so I didn't have time to address that and forgot that they said that. Yeah, that's one of the most ridiculous statements I've ever heard.
Oh, no, I heard it on Cover 3 podcast as well. I forgot which one said it, but they said the same exact thing.
Because TCU beat SMU by a touchdown. They beat them by a touchdown, for one thing. It was a competitive game, and what does Luke Fickell care about TCU beating SMU?
Yeah, and
SMU every year.
And then the other comment that was made was, oh, so he doesn't want to travel to Texas every 3-4 times a season. He already faces Houston. He already faces SMU, Tulsa, Tulane. So don't give me that either. He left because of money, and that's the only reason why he left.
That's why people take jobs. Just anybody out there, we'll scale it down to the working man's pay. If you made $50,000 a year and you got offered a job for $90,000 a year, you would take it.
Absolutely. I mean, even if I like the $50,000 a year job, I have to take that. But no, it comes down to money. He's gonna be probably consistently the 5th or 6th best team in the Big Ten year in and year out. Some years it might be there competing for the Big Ten championship team. I mean, Big Ten championship. Some years maybe a 7-5 year. But I gotta admit, I was wrong about this. I thought for sure Coach Jim Leonard was going to be penciled in for that job. So
I kind of thought so too.
I'm surprised.
So when Paul Chryst got fired, a lot of people were surprised, and I initially was a bit startled, but after I thought about it for just a couple minutes, I thought, okay, what Wisconsin's doing is we have a perception of Wisconsin similar to Iowa. They're conservative, and as long as the guy's doing the job, getting the job done, that they're not going to make a move. But obviously, Wisconsin saw a situation where Paul Chryst, his resume, his one-loss record looks like a Wisconsin coach. He's getting to Big Ten championship games. He's winning 70-75% of his games. He's doing all that, but he's not doing it recently. And you see the decline, and you see the decline in recruiting. And then USC and UCLA are on the way. And Minnesota's getting better, and Purdue's getting better, and Nebraska's going to go higher, and they're going to spend as much money as they need to get better. And they got better facilities anyway, and they got more money at Nebraska than Wisconsin anyway. So certainly you're looking at a new landscape in the Big Ten and thinking, if you're Wisconsin, if you're just going to continue to just kind of stagnate, that you're going to soon be like the 8th best team, best program in the Big Ten.
They had to make a splash higher, in my opinion. And I didn't want to say it, but I didn't think Jim Leonard was that guy, personally, from what I've seen down the stretch here.
Well, I think they made a smart move there. I think what they did was they thought, we have a lot of respect for Jim Leonard. He's a great defensive coordinator. We don't know if he's going to be a great coach. We know Paul Chryst, we need to part ways because he's just not the guy to take us into this new age of college football. So let's get rid of him now because we're not winning this season. We're not going to salvage anything this season and see what Jim Leonard does. And so they gave him a pretty good audition. And what were the results? Well, they were mixed. They were okay. They didn't capsize. They didn't fall off the cliff, but they didn't impress anyone either. So they determined, okay, Jim Leonard's okay, but he's not the guy. We got to do better.
Exactly. And I think their athletic director is kind of newish there, I believe. And and there was rumors he was going to make this on his own and all that. So he definitely made a great hire, in my opinion. I forget the AD there's name escaping my mind, but he definitely made a great hire. And also, one other quick thing before I want to bring up 3 other quick little points about coaching hires. Is basically that I did mention this to you earlier, but the Big Ten is probably going to get rid of divisions, I think. And I said Wisconsin's probably going to lose a game. Instead of a 9-3, it's going to be an 8-4 every year for Wisconsin, typically, because they're getting rid of divisions. They're going to have to face Penn State more. They're going to have to face Ohio State, Michigan, USC, and UCLA coming in. So I said Wisconsin has been kind of getting a bit of a break here with the division they're in for the past 5 or 6 years. So I said I remember telling you this, they get rid of divisions. Wisconsin 10-2 is probably going to be 9-3.
So I would expect the Big Ten to do something similar to what the ACC has done in getting rid of divisions, but you're going to have a schedule format. If they want to protect rivalries first and foremost. And
absolutely.
They want to have a format. So we know that Wisconsin has a big rivalry with Minnesota. They have a rivalry with Iowa. And that's, unless I'm missing something, that's pretty much it. You can call the other divisions, the other teams in the division rivals, but true rivals, it's Iowa and Minnesota. So like the ACC went with a format where you play the same 3 teams every year. And then the rest of the conference is split in half, and you play those 5 teams every other year, and you play the other 5 teams every other year. So I would think with Wisconsin, they're going to play Minnesota and Wisconsin, or Minnesota and Iowa every year. And then there's going to be another team that they're going to have to get put with, whoever that is. And then they're going to see probably USC and UCLA and Ohio State and Michigan like every other year. Something like that. Every 3 years or something like that.
That is true, but I mean, it's not like the way the schedule is going to be rotating. You're probably going to at least be seeing one of those every year. I know some years the schedule rotation, there you sometimes void 2 out of the 3, or all 3 at times. So, and if USC coming in there, I think they're going to make the college football playoffs. That's definitely going to be an issue. And UCLA is good as well. So, I think Wisconsin has to keep that in mind. I think they did with this Luke Fickell hire. But I want to touch on 3 other schools real quick, Mark. Nebraska, we'll go a little bit west to Nebraska. I like the Matt Rhule hire. I do. I think I was actually a bit surprised that's where he ended up at. to be completely honest. But I like the hire. I actually think Nebraska found himself a coach that's proven he knows what he's doing. I don't care about what happened to Carolina Panthers. They never could figure out quarterback there at the Panthers. So that was the issue there to begin with. And basically, I expect Nebraska to maybe not this first season, even though with what's coming back, maybe. But I expect Nebraska to be competing in the Big Ten at the very least, competing for New Year's Six bowls in the very near future with Matt Rhule as head coach.
Yeah, Nebraska can recruit better than and has recruited better than Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa. The player development's been awful, and the schemes and the adjustments and all of that. Everything else done in coaching has been awful for Nebraska under Scott Frost, and before that, Mike Riley. Even though they're very different in terms of their issues. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Nebraska can again. This USC UCLA factor is going to be a bit of an awakening for a number of teams that aren't quite ready to take on two other difficult games on their schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I said, I like the hire. I just think it might just take a year or two. The Arizona State hire of Kenny Dillingham, is that how you pronounce it?
Kenny Dillingham. He was the
Dillingham.
offensive coordinator for Bo Nix at Auburn. Then he went to Florida State. Now at Oregon.
Yep, I think he's an Arizona State guy, and I actually think this is a great hire for Arizona State. He I think he's going to bring energy to the program. He's only 32 years old. It's not because, let's be real, Arizona State and Arizona as well to a bit of a lesser extent, they've been known to hire coaches that was going to have one foot out the door in semi-retirement. This is not going to be the case with this hire.
Yeah.
In my opinion, he's only 32, and he is an Arizona State guy, and I think it's going to work out. If Arizona State stays in the Pac-12, even though I think that league's going to be extinct wherever they end up, I think it's going to work out at the end. I really do.
Yeah, I can't say whether Kenny Dillingham's going to be a success at Arizona State. What I will say is I like their approach to hiring him. I like the approach to thinking, okay, we don't want to retread. We don't want a guy that's, had mixed results at 3 other stops, and this is just the next job, and he's just needing a job, looking for a job, wanting a job, and wants to stay in big time college football because it makes him feel important, and he's 55 years old. And yeah, you want somebody that's on the ascent, somebody who's headed up the ranks, who has fire and energy, motivation to prove something, and who's just launching their career. But he's at least at a point where, from a coaching standpoint, he's proven something. He's been at 3 big-time programs. So it's not going to be a slap in the face or a wake-up call in terms of him getting hit with big-time college football. But now he's got to run the whole program, so that's an adjustment to make. But I agree with their approach to this hire.
And he's an Arizona State guy, so supposedly he was crying during the press conference and everything. So, I think you're going to get his best shot at it. I don't think you're going to get a semi-retired person at the head coaching job. And then
2012. Yep.
And then one other quick point before I let you go, Mark. I think Auburn should keep Cadillac Williams as their head coach. And here's why. You can tell he really cares about the program. You can tell. I mean, I've never seen someone excited about scoring a touchdown to be down 42-21 in my life. He seems like a guy that players can get behind. Auburn's financial situations has to be rough with Gus Malzahn's buyout, with Brian Harsin's buyout, and they're recruiting better under Cadillac Williams than they did with Brian Harsin. So maybe you sit there if you're Auburn, bite the bullet for 2-3 years, because I don't think that I'm not buying Hugh Freeze as that guy because he only won when he cheated. So in my opinion, I just think that you keep him around for maybe 2-3 years, get your financial situation together, and then go get that guy.
Yeah, I don't understand why people are enamored with Hugh Freeze either. Yeah, his best coaching results were because he cheated. So he's doing something similar at Ole Miss, or did, that Lane Kiffin is doing now, except for he cheated. Now, in terms of Cadillac Williams, yeah, a lot of what you said means something. You know, you're trying to attract 17 and 18-year-old student athletes to campus. So I think that means something. I think they respect that he played there. So there's an obvious attachment and investment by the coach when that's his alma mater. That's worked out sometimes. And Jim Harbaugh, that's not worked out at other times. Scott Frost. Now we got Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. So the thought is that coach understands the campus. He understands the culture. He's gone to school there. He's worked there. He understands, just the vibe, the feel, what life is like there. So that's not an adjustment. And it's actually, ingrained in him. Now, him getting excited about scoring touchdowns and everything, that's great. I don't know that really translates to running a football program, but so the only thing I would do if I was going to seriously consider keeping Cadillac Williams as the head coach at Auburn is I would take the approach that Ole Miss took a couple of years ago when they kept around Matt Luke, who had no experience as a head coach, but he was similar to Cadillac Williams in that he was an Ole Miss guy through and through, and he was trying to bring them through a difficult situation after the Hugh Freeze mess. And they hired an offensive coordinator who had been a head coach, Rich Rodriguez. They hired a defensive coordinator who had recently been a head coach at a big-time program, Mike McIntyre at Colorado. I would surround Cadillac Williams with former head coaches.
I think and I was actually getting ready to bring up the Matt Luke, with Matt Luke at Ole Miss. But Mark, I gotta let you go. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Terps. Appreciate you being here. All right. Thank you so much for the contribution coming in here from Jared. Could college football do Premier League style, moving up and down with 25 teams per division, then run the top 25 like the NFL? I don't know what the last statement in that means. Run it like the NFL. I don't get that part of it, but meaning just have standings, I guess. All right. So this gets brought up from time to time, and I understand the allure of this. You give incentive to teams and programs and coaches to succeed and achieve, and there's upward mobility. So UCF and Houston and Cincinnati and Boise State can say, hey, we can play with the big boys. We do it. Elevate us. And then you look at Colorado, and you look at Rutgers in the past, and you look at Wake Forest in the past, and you look at Vandy, and you say, hey, you can't play with us anymore. We've given you enough chance. You drop down to the lower division. I'd see that as more of a detriment than anything. You are going to further tear the fabric of college football. College football fans want their teams to play in divisions and conferences with their rivals. They want to see the same teams. They want those teams to be in their region. We don't want this ever-changing carousel of teams jumping in and out of divisions and conferences. For as interesting as that would be, and it would be, I would love to say for 1 year, Ohio State go play in the SEC, or any result, Virginia Tech go play in the Big 12 for a year. Let's see how you do. It would just be interesting to see. But you're tearing at the fabric of the game and the traditions. I just don't think it's feasible. Yeah. All right. Want to make sure we catch these. Thank you so much for the super chat. Jared That way, no cupcakes. Gotcha. Yes, you don't want to see cupcakes on the schedule. Well, there are other ways to determine that. Number one, there are going to be cupcakes because we can't grind these guys into the ground for 14 and 15 consecutive weeks. So there need to be cupcakes to a certain extent. I think there need to be less cupcakes. I don't like a team from the SEC that's got 4 non-conference games, only scheduling 1 solid opponent and then playing 3 cupcakes. That's too much. So we need to limit the cupcakes, and the only way we're going to do that is to take the scheduling out of the hands of the schools and the conferences. Well, the conferences can schedule their own conference, but take the scheduling component out of the school's hands and devise a scheduling format, which I've done. It's been a long time since I've unveiled that, revealed that, talked about that. So I'll produce some videos this offseason to say, this is how I would schedule college football. And these schools, you're done. You're done scheduling your own games. They're going to be scheduled for you. You play in a league. You play in conferences. You play in college football. You're not going to run around and make your own schedules. That's what leads to some teams breaking their backs with difficult schedules and other teams just mailing it in. Baylor has not played a non-conference opponent in the top 25 since 1997. They don't schedule anyone. Well, they're going to have to play somebody out of conference. It's going to be forced upon them. That's the way it should be. All right. We've got our guy, Tim. Look at that. Can you check email and send stream code? Okay, I will, Tim. We've got it in here. I don't want to be on here forever, but what have we been on here? Hour and 15 minutes. So I will do that, and let's take the next call. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line? Hello? Hello? Going once?
Mark.
Twice? Who do we have? Oh, we got DeAndre. What's going on, DeAndre?
I don't know what is the connection with us today. How you doing?
I am doing just fine.
Okay.
I can hear you.
All right, I'll call to talk about David Shaw. I probably got a few other questions for you. First off, I think David Shaw should go to Georgia Tech. Stanford is higher than Georgia Tech, but they are very similar into their academic standards, and it's a hard place to get people into. And I think one thing that people don't realize that hurt probably Stanford, it's hard to live in the area. So we have to pay your coaches a little bit more because the area that Stanford is in, from my understanding, that area is very high cost of living. My cousin lives out there. He's a lawyer, and he makes $150,000 a year. And he says, nah, it's hard to live in that particular area where Stanford is, even making that amount of money. So I think that's what else hurts Stanford with David Shaw and NIL and all that stuff. I'm sure Stanford NIL probably ain't no problem, but having people on that standard and all that other stuff, I think that pretty much kills it. But I think Georgia Tech will be a great place for them. With it being in the South, the academic standards and the recruiting bed that you could probably get. And he go back to the old school of, I'm going to play 5 or 6 offensive linemen. Well, you got to play 5 offensive linemen, but 6 or 7 offensive linemen at the same time. So I think that would go back, and you can get good running backs anywhere in the South. So I think that would help him out a lot. So, that's what I think about David Shaw. I think he should go there. I know I don't like Michigan and Ohio State, and I have very little respect for Ohio State football. But I wonder, like, let's look at Wisconsin and Iowa. Do they really have a legit chance to win the national championship?
Even with just a second here, DeAndre. You made the statement that you don't like Ohio State and Michigan, which I've known.
Yeah.
You used to say that you didn't have any respect for Michigan.
I still don't. I hate them too. With the utmost respect,
anyway, regardless.
Yeah,
I understand that. But anyway, whatever. So what's your point?
Well, okay, let me address that. I'm going to take 1 minute to address that. The reason why I have issue with Michigan and Ohio State, not even Ohio State, just Ohio State something else, but Michigan, to me, their history is a lie. Yes, they have more national championships. Well, I don't think they got more than Alabama, but the all-time wins and all of that other stuff, to me, it's kind of made up because of the era when they gained most of those wins. I think you even said it. Since 1968, Ohio State has the best record in college football.
Sure.
But Michigan gained so much a bigger lead on somebody else because everybody wasn't playing the same type of schedule.
Yeah.
And they were playing schools like the Chicago Heart Institute or we're gonna go play the YMCA down
Sure.
the street.
Yeah.
I don't know the quality of those teams, but it seems like that was kind of fabricates the history of Michigan football.
Yeah.
That's why I had
Michigan
an
built
issue
a
with
big
football.
lead. Yeah. Michigan built a big lead in winning percentage and wins and quote unquote national championships back way before any of us were walking this planet. Yes.
Yeah, and that's my point. And we have had this conversation before. Since what they only have a half a national championship since what 1965 or somewhere like that. I can't remember.
1948. 1948.
Yeah, and so that's why I have an issue with Michigan football.
I got
And
you.
that's something that
They're
me
not
and you have
making it
talked
up.
about.
They're not
Yeah.
making it up. Those are the records.
Right, well, that's true. But who did you play? It goes back to like when we talk about segregation. The best players in the South at that time was at the HBCUs, and we both can admit to that.
Sure.
But it's fake history. You know what I'm saying? And I know what you mean, but if you
It's not
cannot sit up
fake,
here and
it's-
say, "Yeah, if if you say that, if you
it needs to be explained.
right,
It
so
needs to
that's
be
why I
put
have an
into
issue with
context.
Michigan.
It needs to
Right.
be put into context. Yes.
Right.
It's just like Major League Baseball. Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and Ken Griffey Jr. would not have been playing Major League Baseball 50 or 60 or 70 years earlier.
Right.
They would have been completely out of it. We wouldn't even, yes, unfortunately, that's
Yeah.
what happened. Yep.
Yeah, but that's why I have an issue with Michigan football. Not no other reason. Okay, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, schools like that, and I know all you got to do is get into the dance, and that's all that matters. But do you think legitimately they have a chance to win a national championship?
No.
Okay. The reason why I bring that up is because I see all these coaches get fired. I think Matt Rule's a good coach. I don't think he should have went to the NFL. Certain people are built for college football. Certain people are built for the NFL.
Yep.
And I don't think he was built for college football. I can understand why he left. He did a good job at Temple or Baylor. But I don't really think he's going to get any different results than what any of the other coaches got. I mean, he might be better than Scott Frost, but is he really going to get that big of a difference? And the conference is about to get harder with UCLA, Southern Cal, and then he might have to play Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State more. So I don't know how they out of conference schedule look, but
Well, are
I mean they play.
supposed to just give up?
No, I didn't say give up, but my point is, are you going to be able to do it? I mean, like what Clemson did, Clemson's in the South. And I don't think anybody thought Clemson was going to win a national championship the year that Deshaun Watson took it there, or the year they almost beat Alabama. I don't think anybody really think that Clemson had a legit chance to win a national championship. I bet you that. I mean, look how long it took Georgia to win one, and nobody has as much talent in Georgia outside of probably Alabama. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, but I just ask you, because I see a lot of coaches, like everybody say, get rid of the coach at Iowa State, but that's the style that you had to play. The same thing with the guy at Wisconsin. That's what you had to play because that's what type of players you attract. And you had to play that big physical brand of football. My next question or conversation, I was going to ask you about I forgot because you threw me off with the Michigan comment. Oh, Ohio State. Now let me ask you. This is just a question. Uh, Just a look in at football because of what happened with Clemson and Notre Dame. Do you think that Ohio State might have to get back to more of a running quarterback style? Because we look at the last 2 or 3 quarterbacks they done had, Hoskins, this Stroud. I can't remember who was before Stroud. Fields. Fields was more. He could run the ball a little bit more. But do you think they need to get back to having a dual threat type quarterback?
Well, Justin Fields could run the ball a lot.
Yeah.
Justin Fields is a great runner. He's not
Right.
Michael Vick or Vince Young, not quite,
Mhm.
but he's close. He's an elite dual threat quarterback.
Yeah, but my point is about Ohio State. It seems like when it gets colder and they're not, Ohio State was a very physical football team in the 90s, even up to Braxton Miller. So do they need to go back to that style instead of some of the type of finesse play that they do? And they're still winning, but they're having trouble with Michigan right now, who's built to win in the cold.
Well, it wasn't cold yesterday. It was like
Mm.
56 degrees and sunny, for one thing.
Right.
But yeah, anytime you recruit and sign and play a quarterback who is not a running threat, you take away a threat to the defense. So that quarterback better be extremely, extremely good. He better be able to make up for that by how good of a passer he is. Now, CJ Stroud, I still think is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. But if I was recruiting and signing players and you're not Kansas State, you're not Illinois, where if you get somebody anywhere close to CJ Stroud, you're going to grab him regardless of what he can't do. You're Ohio State. So I do think you bring up a good point, and I talked about that last night, that I would go back to recruiting quarterbacks that could be too.
Yeah, because I bring that up because it seems like Day is more of a thrower and of a football than
Sure.
Urban Meyer was, and even Tulsa, especially Tulsa. But like I said, I just think that it got away from being Ohio State football from what we remember back in the day, even recent years with Braxton Miller and some of those guys. Now it's more exciting putting 5 or 6 wide receivers out there, but I just think they need to go back to it because I don't see that big physical. Because if we look at the teams that's beat Michigan, Ohio State the last 2 years, is Oregon, who is a very physical running team. Then it's Michigan. So I'm just saying, but also get to Dabo for a minute. If Dabo does not improve, would it show that it was his coordinators that made Dabo? Because we all know Dabo paid his coordinators more than him, but now he moved. His coordinators are less experienced. So Dabo doesn't turn it around next year, and this not a bad year. But I'm just saying, if he doesn't get it together, a little bit different playing for national championships, would it say something about Dabo coaching style or something like that?
Well, I don't know how many times I said on here a couple of years ago that for Dabo Swinney to continue to do what he's doing, it's highly improbable. Just from the sheer standpoint of being able to maintain that kind of pace, that winning pace of over 90% and going to national championship games almost every year.
Right.
So that's just a difficult pace to keep up.
Right. And I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And the other reason why it's a different pace that I was trying to tell the fellas since last night, teams are going to catch up with you. You're not the only one sitting up there with the building that they built for the players. You're not sitting up there you're not the only person putting in it. I remember back in the day when Kansas State was like a really terrible program, and and they started recruiting mainly junior college players, but they were the first team to have a major fitness center, or even going back to Nebraska in the 80s. They were the first one to really incorporate weightlifting and they were winning. And I look at that and I say, people's going to eventually catch up with you. And like I said, I admire with Dabo and all those Clemson fans want to keep winning. But at the same time, there's some things that got to be addressed, and you got to find new ways to keep that. Recruiting ain't an issue, but it seems like the coordinators are the issue. And when I say that, you still got guys who wasn't missing or catches like they were. I know the coordinators went out there catching the ball for them, but you just see those issues and development like you see today. A few years ago, we had Jeff Scott there. And Jeff Scott may not be a good head coach, but maybe he was good at coaching wide receivers. And it's like, I won't go with Tyler Grissom. And Tyler Grissom may not be a good football, because there was no separation. I know everybody wants to jump down DJ's neck, but those receivers, man, are terrible. Outside of Antonio Williams, I know he fumbled, but if you go look at most of their receivers, they're really terrible at catching the ball and competing for the ball. And I understand South Carolina has a person they think is going to be a D1 pick, but they playing man-to-man across, and you ain't beating them after Bo Collins will go out. It's like, what are you doing out there? How do you get to scheme these guys open? So, that's what I'm looking at. And I won't let you go, Mark, but I got one more comment for you.
Yep.
People forget about this about Nebraska. I know everybody's talking about the 90s. Prop 48 limitations has hurt Nebraska. I'm not sure what show I was watching, but they said the team that beat Florida, what was it, 63-7? It was something ridiculous. And the one that beat Peyton Manning, most of their team was Prop 48 players. And I think after they went to the Big 12, the only way they could join the Big 12 is that they agreed to reduce the amount of Prop 48 players that they were going to take in. So a lot of people forget that. And again, we talked about this before. Most of the best football is played in the South. I'm not taking it away from what Michigan and Ohio State and Notre Dame or Penn State is doing right now. However, majority of the best teams are down south. A lot of people are not saying I'm going to go up to Notre Dame to play because everybody's on the team. Not saying they're not, but I'm just saying that most of the teams are, most of the best teams can be seen on TV. You can go find Old Dominion on TV. So I think that sort of hurts Nebraska because I was watching that show on the 1983 lawsuit and how much better teams got. I think it was Oklahoma and Georgia that sued the NCAA. Like, well, why you get to control how many times I get to be on television? And for some reason, Nebraska, I think Notre Dame was on TV a lot more than a whole lot of other teams. So that's what one of the lawsuits is about. So I think a lot of people need to look at that. You necessarily ain't going to get those type of players to come up there to Nebraska to play like you would because of the Prop 48. And then also from the what's called it. And I was looking at Nebraska's roster in the 80s. A lot of those guys came from New Jersey. So Turner Gill and I think Roger Kerr was both all from New Jersey. But there was a whole bunch of players that they got out of New Jersey at that time. So, But Mark, I'll let you go, man. Sorry for taking up so much time.
Thanks, DeAndre.
Yeah. All right.
Appreciate you being here. A couple things with Clemson. Yeah, I can't explain their wide receiver decline, but as he says, DJ gets all the blame, but the wide receiver play has been marginal. It's like you're watching Illinois or Kansas State. It's been okay, but it's not Clemson. It's not Martavis Bryant. It's not Mike Williams. It's not Adam Humphries and Hunter Renfrow and DeAndre Hopkins and all those guys. So if you look at the recruiting rankings, I don't think that has slipped at the wide receiver position. Maybe it's just bad scouting combined with lack of development. Plus, it helps to have a generational quarterback, and they had that in 2015-16. And then in 17, they lost to Syracuse, and they only scored 6 points in the playoffs against Alabama because they had a marginal quarterback. And then 2018 and 19, they again had a generational quarterback. All right, Tim's here. What's going on, Tim?
Oh, hello. How you doing? Actually, I called 2 reasons. One, the main, you got some pound sterling. Look at that.
What do we got?
Somebody said English money.
Oh, okay. It must be
From V.
Ronan. I'll have to check that out. Yes, I'm listening. I may go grab my glasses while I'm listening. Go ahead.
No, just while I was calling the StreamYard, I need this Voice of College Football StreamYard link so that I can have the privileges. That's what, not the link to the chat. That's what I was.
Okay.
That's what the email was. Yeah, it's stupid. Every time I clear my cookies and cache, it dumps that, and I gotta bother you again.
That's what you're looking for. I got you.
And then I called after that. The guy called about Fickell. And the reason Fickell's going from Cincinnati to Wisconsin is the money. Did I hear him right?
Well, yeah, we didn't really get into that, but it's obviously more than money. It's money. People take jobs because of money, and money increases. But yeah, it's a much better job.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Exactly.
And he's going to the Big Ten. He's going to one of the 2 great conferences. Yes.
You know, they kept saying about, I don't know the phrase, but anyway, the fact that Riley's going to be in the West, I think is a really good thing for the Big Ten West, because they're going to have to get their crap together to get, to improve the coaching situations out there.
Well, we'll see what the Big Ten does with scheduling and with the divisions.
Well, regardless, they're going to have to, they definitely need to upgrade.
Yeah, you're going to play those teams. Yes. And we've seen 2 teams go out, Nebraska and Wisconsin, and hire top flight coaches.
Yeah. It's going to be, so it's and with coaching, like we were talking last night on the USC show about, what's more important, the fact you have good coaching or good quarterback play, and Matt and Tony were saying absolutely the coaching. And so with the improvements to, again, the Big Ten West in coaching, I don't know, this whole balance of power between the Big Ten and the SEC might actually start coming into question. I know that DeAndre was just talking about the recruiting, but recruiting, there's no rules against recruiting the South. Just because you're in the South doesn't mean to stay in the South. So
true.
That's one.
I think his point is just generally players tend to stay close to home.
Close to home. Well, and that's what helps USC a lot as well. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with that. But, look at Ohio State. You guys are always going into Florida, right? And going into Texas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, certain programs, can recruit nationally, like Notre Dame has done historically as well. So I agree. But also the thing is in the South, you have a lot more competition in the South for other, so it's just getting torn up. So, I mean, there's enough good players these days that there's enough to go around. And I think because the NIL changes everything. You want to stay at home, or do you want to go make, $1 million going to another school? It's going to throw $1 million at you. So I think it's going to level the playing field a little bit as far as the talent gaps between teams. I think it actually does help the smaller schools in the strangest of ways, just by diluting the talent that's being centralized at certain schools. So it'll be interesting.
But don't you think that the programs that already have the money, that are paying for all the facilities and everything else, and the coaches and the coaching staffs and the recruiting budgets, are going to be the same schools that are going to pay for NIL?
Well, I mean, look at here's the thing about USC. You had schools like Rutgers and Indiana getting more football money than USC.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really about what conference you're in. And I agree, alumni base and NIL collectives do help, but the real money is again in these TV contracts that is being centralized in two conferences. So that part is true.
Yeah. Which is only increasing in the Big Ten and the SEC, and USC and UCLA are coming on board, and that's going to increase the value of the Big Ten. Obviously, it already has. It's already been displayed in this TV deal, and we'll just have to see how the recruiting plays out to see if there are going to be linemen and linebackers, and I just don't want to isolate it to linemen and linebackers. That's a stereotype coming from the Midwest, but it is true to a certain extent. So it's both stereotype and it's truth, that if some of those players are going to be like, you know what, it would be cool to play football at USC, excuse me, but still be able to play most of my schedule against teams here in the Big Ten. I'm from Iowa. But man, that would be awesome to go to USC, but I can still play the majority of my schedule against the Big Ten.
And that's why I got really happy when we heard about the move. The money was nice, but the idea to recruit offensive linemen out of Iowa, out of the Midwest was absolutely which is exactly what a USC fan wants to hear. But and the fact is with Fickell, we now know that, and with let's look at Dillingham. Okay. Dillingham's gonna go down to Arizona State. I don't know exactly what the situation is at Arizona State, but I do know that they're in a talent hotbed. I mean, sitting there, Arizona's recruiting base is going way up over the past decade or so. You're right next to Texas. You're right next to Los Angeles, Southern California, and then even Utah. Even Utah's recruiting has been going up lately as well with linemen and even quarterbacks. So I think Dillingham can make an instant splash with just the way how quickly with the portal you can swing the stuff around. It's gonna be pretty interesting with how these coaching changes are going to change the complexion of these different conferences. And I mean, it's got to be a blow to Oregon to lose Dillingham, because I think he was one of the really big bright spots on that staff. I've not been impressed by the defense whatsoever.
No,
but Dillingham was doing some great stuff.
Yeah, he was. He was. And I was just going to hit on the other side of the recruiting situation with USC and UCLA joining would be for me that obviously they're in a hotbed and in USC's prime, which they're coming back into with Lincoln Riley, had no issue keeping their pick of the litter and whatever they wanted out of Southern California. But we've seen in recent years, the SEC come in, Ohio State come in, and get top flight players, because maybe a lot of those players thought, you know what, the Pac-12 isn't really where it's at. And yeah, USC's awesome, but well, even at that time, Clay Helton was running a different program at USC, but them running to the SEC or some of the top teams in the Big Ten versus now the thought is, oh, I can stay home and I'm going to play in one of the two, power brand conferences, but I can still stay home and do that, play in the Big Ten and be exposed on TV in the biggest games and all that.
Yeah. Well, for a long time, because of the self-sanctioning USC was doing with the head coaching hires and how they're running the athletic department, as well as UCLA with Chip Kelly, and everyone was scratching their head like, what's going on? That seems like it's correcting itself. But for a long time, you'd see a lot of the talent in Southern California going up to Oregon, right? Going off the east, going to Clemson, going to Ohio State, and so it was bleeding out. But that's not the typical situation. But there will be. I mean, think about for Lemansky and Erica, you guys are going to have you be coming in Southern California, and you guys actually might get a quarterback. You guys might get look at these quarterbacks in Southern California. There's so many of them that are all just scattered all over the United States, the big programs. You guys could walk in here and get yourself a 4 or 5 star quarterback that can change the complexion of that offense and change your program almost overnight once you get rid of a new offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
But those two things together, that coming in and getting skilled players in Southern California, knowing those kids, knowing that they'll come at least, maybe a trip out home, either to UCLA or to USC every year, that might be enough to get those guys, that are on the border. So yeah. It's gonna be interesting how that all changes recruiting.
No doubt.
So that's about it.
All right,
I'm gonna talk to you on Tuesday about the quality wins versus losses with TCU and USC, because I'm looking at the quality wins for TCU and I'm just not really seeing them compared to USC. And as well as I do agree that if you have an undefeated team, that they need to get in there regardless of who they played. But getting TCU in is one thing, but seeding them above USC at 3, I think it's going to be interesting if we all keep this idea that like a 2-loss LSU or a 2-loss Tennessee, because they have quality wins, is better than a 1-loss team below them. I think that would also apply to a team that's undefeated and a 1-loss USC when they have wins over Notre Dame. They have a chance to event if they do advance. If we're even having this conversation, that'll mean that we have defeated Utah, and which means we beat everybody on our schedule, along with UCLA and Oregon State, which are ranked. And I think that resume, if we're doing resumes, I can't see how TCU's resume, given the fact that not as much was given to a loss as the benefit of having quality wins. I don't see, if we stay that same criteria, that you're going to put TCU above USC, especially USC's one loss. I mean, USC's one loss is 1 point on 2-point conversion. That's the only blemish on their whole schedule.
Sure.
So it'll be interesting to see what you and the rest of college football deem, because so far it's been, I mean, unless it's just applied to the SEC, that quality wins are more important than maybe a close loss or close loss, blowout 25-point losses. Forget the loss. Let's look at these great wins that they have. And I know USC doesn't have a win equal to like Alabama or beating, well, that's it really. I'm not as high on LSU as you guys are. I think LSU's getting, and Tennessee are both getting exposed. They're hovering around the top 10 mark, but they've got some ugly losses on their schedule now. And none of the teams we're talking about have them.
Yeah. You also have to understand that I was speaking in the moment. So with new information comes new evaluations.
But that's why we can't really just look at just resume, who beat who, because there is a second part to that is, okay, this team beat this team, but let's get our hands dirty. I get it. I totally get your criteria. I get why you do it. I think it's probably the best way to do it. But I think you'd be the first one. It's as we're saying, it's not infallible. It's just we're going off of the past. We're not looking at the present. We're not looking at the whole big picture. And back then I knew that LSU was crap. Oh, sorry, let me take it back. LSU was not this shiny star that everyone's trying to make LSU. I knew that because I know their head coaches, and we'll all talk about that a year from now as well.
Well,
so
LSU has proven themselves not to be playoff worthy. Are they a talented team that has a lot of warts? Yes, that's what they are. They're a good team with a lot of talent, with a lot of warts. They're in a mix with another 15 or 20 teams in the country, something in that range, between 10 and 30 that could win at any point or lose at any point to all the other teams in that 20 range.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get caught up in the fact that if you look at, if we look at TCU, for instance, they got a lot of really big pub early because they were, TCU, they beat Oklahoma. Oh, they beat Kansas, right? And now we're realizing in the second half of the season is like, yeah, that's great, but that doesn't really mean much.
Well, here, let's see if you agree with this point on the TCU versus USC comparison. That, of course, I was making an evaluation a few weeks ago, and I was saying, look at USC's back end of their schedule. It gets really hard and gets really tough, and they've cleared 2 of those major obstacles out of 3. So when I look at TCU's schedule and therefore their wins versus USC's, what I see is that USC has better wins at the top. UCLA, Notre Dame, Utah. Well, if they beat Utah, Oregon, they didn't play Oregon. They didn't play Washington.
Oregon State.
Oregon State. Yeah.
We beat Oregon. Yeah. Again, that's another team. Anyway, we've been on them huge. We've been Beaver believers all year, and that's a good team.
Yeah, they're a good team. We can argue that Kansas State and Texas are in that same range, though. It's not like TCU doesn't have any good wins. The point I was originally going to make is that I believe that USC's top wins are better than TCU's top wins, meaning their top 2 or 3. But if you go through the depth of the Big 12, the conferences, if you go down 6, 7 wins and you want to take the deep dive into that TCU has defeated more decent teams than USC has.
Well, I mean, again, I don't think a lot of fans out there, and maybe you as well, do not give Washington State the credit for being a good team. The decent teams we're talking about, Washington State's in that group as well.
Yeah, they're a decent team. Yeah, they're in the realm of Oklahoma State and Texas Tech and Oklahoma. Yeah.
So do you believe? So you believe that the Big 12 is a top to bottom, a deeper conference than the Pac-12?
It's a deeper conference with decent teams, not with top tier, not with top 15 teams. No. The Pac-12 has more top 15 teams. They've got Utah, UCLA, Oregon, etc. The Big 12 doesn't. But if you keep going, there aren't Arizona States and Arizonas and Colorados in the Big 12. They're not.
Well, I see.
Stanford, Cal, those are awful teams.
Help me out. What are the bottom four in the Big 12? Would you say?
West Virginia, Iowa State for sure. Those two. Then probably Texas Tech and Oklahoma.
Okay. And I'll concede that the bottom two being Colorado and Stanford might be two of the worst schools in the country. But if you look at Arizona's offense, they could put up points. If you look at ASU's defense, I think once you get towards, like you're talking about, you said once you start getting towards 15 to 40, it really groups together. Well, once you get past 30 to let's say 90, that group's pretty grouped together as well. So I think we might be.
I don't know. 30's close.
Oh, sorry, 40. So 40 to 70. I won't go to 90. 40 to 70 is also pretty much close in that group. And I think that's that group of decent teams that we're talking about. I think those margins get even smaller as well, really.
Okay. I'm just making the statement, and I believe this to be true. Otherwise, I wouldn't make the statement that the Big 12 is better. No, I'm not going to say that. I don't believe that the Big 12 is better than the Pac-12, but the Big 12 has a balance all the way through the conference down to the very bottom, where the Pac-12 has better teams at the top than the Big 12, but they have worse teams at the bottom.
I think that can be said about a lot of conferences, really. Once you get towards the bottom, outside of the SEC, once you start getting towards the bottom of conferences, it gets pretty bad.
So the thing I will say in USC's favor, if what I say is true, what I'll say in USC's favor is, even though I want to be able to look at the entirety of the schedule and see who's playing a more difficult schedule top to bottom, there is an argument, and it's valid, that it only matters that you can beat the best teams. It doesn't matter that you played 8 decent teams, because that's not who you're playing in the playoff, or who you need to show that you can compete against and beat would be Oregon and UCLA and Washington and those kind of teams, not that you just beat a bunch of bowl teams.
Okay. Yeah. I would just put, I agree. The bottom of the Pac-12 is really bad. And then you get towards the bottom 4, but I'd take the top 8 in the Pac-12 over the top 8 in the Big 12. I'd put my mortgage on it. I just think that they're gonna win the majority of those games. And I'm not talking just the top 4. I mean, the top 8 in the Pac-12 against the top 8. Because once you start getting down towards 6, 7, 8 in the Big 12, there's also a huge drop off. So I don't know. Really quick, one more thing before we get out of here. Let's just assume, I don't think it's going to happen actually, but TCU loses to Kansas State.
Yeah.
Who gets the 4th spot?
Ohio State.
Ohio State has better wins than Alabama.
They've got a better record.
But we talked record. We talked about that.
Record. And Notre Dame and Penn State, with only one loss coming to Michigan. And again, if people look at the final score, it looks horrible. If they watched the game, they understand, Michigan dominated the 4th quarter, but it was a 4-quarter game. It was in doubt with 7 or 8 minutes left in the game. And that's what the committee's supposed to be doing, is really understanding the game and not just they saw a final score. I think it's a debate. I think Alabama plays a tougher schedule in conference than Ohio State does. So Alabama's got wins against Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas. Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas. Who did they beat in the West? Anybody good? Or in the East? That's pretty much their resume. And Ohio State beat Penn State, Notre Dame, Maryland, Iowa. Yeah, I'll take Ohio State's complete resume, and that the basic fact that they only lost 1 game, not 2 games, and they lost to the number 2 team in the country.
What about Tennessee then? about marquee wins.
Well,
they try to sneak up in
them
there.
getting curb stomped means something. Again, context.
Mark, be fair. Mark, I brought the same comments up
All right,
before a
I
week
haven't
ago.
finished my statement.
Be fair, though.
I haven't finished my statement. They did get curb stomped at the end in totality of the game, but it was a 35-31 game. I believe in that you need to really look at the game and not just see the final score.
Yeah.
Because there are 63-38 games all over the place that were started out 28-0 and they were never a game.
Oh no, Mark, I don't mean that. I'm not saying that. I agree with you. That game was Knowles had a very high risk selling out for to stop the run, right? Which gave us a lot of explosives. No, I'm with you that. I'm talking about Tennessee with the 2 losses compared to Ohio State's 1 loss. What I'm looking at is again, all last week I was ridiculed pretty much, not by you, but by the chat.
Yeah.
When I was saying that, teams that have blowouts should not be in the top 5, should not be considered for these things. And I was literally, yeah, but look at the wins. Look at all the wins.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, all those wins, I would say that Tennessee's wins are better than both Alabama, right, and Ohio State. If we're looking at the wins.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what metrics are we using for this, and do they change week to week based on who's won and who's lost?
Yeah, they change week to week.
No. The criteria changes.
Criteria does not change. Should not change. The evaluation of the wins and losses has to change week to week. So Tennessee's win against LSU got downgraded this past weekend. It took a hit.
Mm-hmm. They're still a top 12, 13 team.
Yeah. Their blowout loss to South Carolina gained a little bit of. So South Carolina backed up that win pretty substantially. That's pretty impressive what they just did. I know Clemson's not vintage Clemson, but they're still one of the 10 or 15 best teams in the country. And what South Carolina did is confirm that wasn't a complete fluke what they did.
Watching the Clemson, sorry.
And to your point, Tim, teams do change. So maybe South Carolina is a much different version and a much different team today than they were 6 weeks ago.
No, I'm with you. Now people are starting to speak my language. Earlier, Christopher Foote in the chat says about, now Tim wants to transfer the property. See, here's the thing, Chris. If I want to talk to people in Mexico, right, I'm not going to walk in speaking English. I'm going to use their language. And the language of this platform is we have to rely sometimes on transferred property. And I think that there's some validity to that. However, it's still completely fallacious logically. We have to suspend that idea because it is an absolute fallacy to use a transitive property. However, if that is the common language that we're using here, then that's why I use the transitive property. You can't go, he's using transitive property. That's because, when in Rome, right, you need to speak Italian. You can't make your points to people if they can't understand what you're doing. So therefore, you have to back up your points with those. And all I'm coming back with is, again, I got blasted last week for saying, or 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, USC was a 1-loss team behind a 2-loss team. And all I kept hearing was this. Yes, it was a 1-loss to USC at a 1-loss. But look at the wins these guys have. And now I'm hearing, but now those wins don't mean as much now. Instead of me saying, I'm watching these teams play and I'm seeing what they're doing to teams and I'm looking at their numbers and I'm not getting. You have one team that gets completely blown out. And that's not transitive property. That means that you're a team that can be blown out. It's not transitive property. It's like your team has some huge flaws that someone could take advantage of. When you play close games and you win, it means you have some flaws, but you overcome those flaws. When you get blown out, you have some flaws that people can take advantage of, and you can't make changes. You can't make adjustments in the second half to cover up your flaws that they've uncovered. That's the difference between me and a really competitive team that's given 2 weeks to play a bowl game than a team that has some significant flaws that people can take advantage of and just mop the floor with you. Like what Knowles did, I think was brilliant. I think what Knowles did was brilliant because I think if he came out playing straight up, I think we might have seen Michigan run right over the top of everyone. But Knowles made them change their offense. And kudos to JJ and kudos to Michigan for being able to overcome that, play a different style of offense, and still win that game. I think that is amazing. I also think it's amazing what Knowles did. But when you do that, when you sell it, stop the run, you're going to give up explosives. And it's a big flaw, Mark. You know what I mean? Will we agree to that? It's just, well, sorry, it's not as much a flaw. I don't think anybody, whoever plays Michigan, you better have a stout defensive line, or you better be able to make them one-dimensional and cover those explosives. So, which makes them a very dangerous team. So I'm just trying to get a feel on what the community thinks of how we're going, forward. We're going to do this, because I'm not saying you, Mark. I'm talking about the chat. So let's be very clear on that. The chat just gets ridiculous with this idea that, SEC because SEC, therefore SEC. And I'm like, okay, but look at you guys. There are some flaws in these, and we're now seeing these flaws. Yes, South Carolina beating Clemson was good, but I watched that Clemson game. Clemson gave that game away. Coughing up fumbles on kick, was a punter kick. Well, bad read between the quarterback, just him hand punting that ball.
Sure, sure they
Clemson's
did.
A better team,
but Clemson was playing at home where they never lose. That was a monumental accomplishment by South Carolina, winning at Clemson where they hadn't lost a game since 2016. And yes, Clemson made major mistakes to give them that game, but in defending, and I hate to do this, the SEC as the best conference, that wasn't the best team in the SEC playing the best team in the ACC. That was like the 9th best team in the SEC playing the best team in the ACC. Okay, the transitive property. The only thing I'll say about this is I believe in having a zillion discussions with you on this, that you'll agree with this. It's just another piece of information. We shouldn't go crazy on it and say, okay, we're going to compare USC and Florida. We obviously have no reason to do that because Florida's not a factor. But let's just say, well, what do we have? They both played Utah. So we're going to come to the conclusion, Florida beat Utah, Utah beat USC, so Florida's better than you. That's ridiculous. Obviously, we all know that. That's ridiculous. There's the transitive property at work in a completely insane way. However, well, Florida did play a football game against Utah, and here's the result. Not only was there a final score, there was a lot of context there, where they played, when they played, horrible quarterback decision at the end of the game, etc. We know USC, they had to play in a completely different location that favored Utah, and we know all the conditions. But it's a game. They're valid results. They're valid games, and we can come to. And that's just one piece of information. You shouldn't build a complete evaluation of all three teams based on them each playing one game against Utah. But it's a piece of information.
It is, and usually some people take that little. And again, anyone says statistics, you realize there are outliers, or there are things that happen that you need to look at the bigger picture. But that's what drove Tony and me specifically crazy by some of our SEC friends when in the chat they decided to bury the entire Pac-12 conference because somehow, some way, the 8th or 9th best or 10th best SEC team beat the best Pac-12 team. That's what it's touted as. And then therefore the entire conference was wiped out. And now I know you didn't do that, but a lot of people in this community did. And I'm looking back now, and the chickens are coming to roost. The fact of the matter is that Utah is a good team, but if you look at the top 4 or 5 teams in the Pac-12, any one of them could beat any one of them, right? Sure. And any one of them could have an off night. And we're giving excuses to LSU and Tennessee and other teams that, they had a bad night. But this community sometimes is so quick to bury the Pac-12. One game played in the very first game in August. All of a sudden, now we know the narrative for the whole year, and we'll keep pointing back to it as far as we can to invalidate a conference, because that data point, Mark, has been reissued on this channel in the chat. I can't even count how many times. Well, Florida beat Utah, so that, SEC, right? And I've been hearing that all year, and I hope next year when we do this, we get a little wiser, we get a little bit older, and we realize that transitive property is a tool, but is not everything. And that analogy was pretty bad.
Well, we also understand that that's not all the SEC has to stand on.
Yeah, but it's a data point, and that was the biggest data point because how many teams in the SEC played the Pac-12? 3?
Yes.
And Oregon, we can have that argument again. I think Oregon is insanely flawed. I think, matter of fact, I actually wanted to play. I was saying on the Pac-12 show, I want to play Oregon because I wanted Caleb to get the Heisman, and I don't want to play that Utah defense. I want to play that Oregon defense because he probably put up 400, 500 yards in that game. So,
but
looking back on it,
you're kind of proving the point. I understand that you're saying Oregon is flawed, and they are flawed. Almost every team in the nation's flawed to some degree. But you're almost, in a sense, taking one of the best teams in the Pac-12, and I think they're all so close. I think USC might be separating right now, but the rest of them, maybe including USC, are so close that you're telling us that one of the best teams in the Pac-12 is extremely flawed.
They're one of the best teams, is extremely flawed, but they're also incredibly talented with Dillingham on offense. There are mitigating factors. We've seen plenty of teams. Look at Lincoln Riley, OU, when they play Georgia, was that 17?
Yeah.
So I mean, look at that. That team defense pretty bad, but holy shit, look at that offense.
Yeah.
I kind of see Oregon that way. So Oregon's going to win a lot of games by just overpowering you on offense and having a severely flawed defense. So that doesn't mean that they're a bad team. It means they played Georgia. How many teams in the SEC are going to do that to Oregon? We just don't know. We really don't know. Well, this and that, and this and that. We don't know what they would do to an Oregon team.
This is what I will say about the Pac-12. That I remember after the 2014 season, Oregon, of course, lost the national championship game. I don't remember the other results in the conference. I know that Arizona went to the Pac-12 championship game, and then they got whipped by Boise State in a bowl game. And the Pac-12 was starting to show some slippage. But I thought people were taking it way to an extreme. And I got on here with a whiteboard, and I went through all the conferences and all the results, and I showed that the Pac-12 was still a strong conference based on the results versus the other conferences. Now, they continued to decline after that, and I think the conference has generally, over about the past 5 football seasons, been the worst conference out of the 5, generally. Now we come into this season, and I have to, if I'm going to do what I tell everyone I'm going to do, I have to dismiss everything my preconceived idea of how good the Pac-12 is. Have to do my best to forget it and just look at this season. And this season, Oregon has pretty much played to the level that I thought they were. This is pretty much what I thought Oregon was. I picked them to go 9-3. All the other teams in the Pac-12 at the top, the ones that matter, Washington, USC, Oregon State, I'd say they've been exactly what I thought too. They've gone 7-2 in the conference, 9-3 overall. That's exactly what I predicted Utah and Oregon to do. 9-3, 7-2. So they've been basically exactly who I thought they were. USC's been better, not significantly better, but obviously they're a million miles away from where they were last year, but even better than I expected. A little bit better than I expected. Oregon State's better. UCLA's better. Washington's better. So the Pac-12 is exceeding my expectations and playing extremely good football. With
Oregon State's 9-3, they're playing extremely better.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't remember where I picked them. Probably 6-6 or something. So that there are 6 teams in the Pac-12 that are anywhere from the top 12 or 13 teams in the country to the top 25, something in that range. You start taking UCLA and Utah and Oregon State. I would have no issue with somebody saying those are the 13th, 14th best teams in the country, all the way to like 25. They're so close,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and here's another one. Who was he? Someone, Antoine, whoever you are. You're talking about the fact that we play flag football here on the West Coast. Here's what USC does. We actually play out of conference games. We played Notre Dame last night. And Notre Dame has been running all over teams, including Clemson. And USC held them to under 100 points rushing.
Yeah.
Let that sink in. And here's what I love about that. What I like I like the way that Grinch made kind of like what happened with Ohio State. We made a team who does something really good. We made them have to do something else to beat us.
Yeah.
You know, that's the sign of a good team. You can't get new players. I don't think Grinch has the guys on defense that he wants yet. He's had 1 year to turn around the worst. And I'm not saying this lightly, the worst USC defense. Anyone that knows football, anyone that's watched USC, the worst USC defense in history, and turned it around to a team that could stop a pretty formidable run game. He did that. That's coaching. He can't magic up new players. He doesn't have the defensive line of a Georgia, right? He doesn't have the linebackers, you know, of like let's say like an Oregon. Okay, he doesn't have these guys on staff, but he brought in some pretty good guys. He's worked what he has, and he's out schemed people. That's what you pay your coordinator for. And I got news for you: with a 10-win, 11, 12, 13-win season, USC's going to get a lot of really good guys on defense, and then we'll see what Grinch can do with those guys. So to say we play flag football out here, I think USC Charbonnet, that guy's going to run for 100 yards on some SEC teams. Would you agree, Mark? That offense, we held them under 100 yards. Why? Because that's what they do great. And Grinch made them throw the ball. So we can go back and forth on the stupid insults about they don't play defense out west or whatever. We could do that. But I can just point to when USC has a good coach, we have really great defenses, and history shows that. And I'm thinking that what Grinch has done with these data points that we have, if you know football, you would be going, wow, yeah, hell yeah. That was amazing what Grinch did. Hey, that's pretty cool what Knowles did. You know, I think maybe a couple of the explosive, maybe you guys need some back end guys, Mark. I don't know what it is. But, you know, you're also playing a really good, you got to give credit to Michigan's offense as well. But Knowles made Michigan do what they don't do. They took away what they do great, and that's coaching. So you guys got to really be realistic when you make your insults. There's a lot of flaws on USC. That's not really one of them right now.
I got to think that DeReal wants to talk to you.
I'm sure I'm going to hear about how Kentucky's going to win Levis for Heisman, right?
All right, DeReal, go ahead.
Hello, Tim. How are you doing?
I'm timing this just because we've got people waiting.
Oh,
All
we
right.
meet again.
First off, fight on, Tim. If we can throw up the victory for USC making the Pac-12 championship game playing Oregon. Tim, you're right about the wins. I believe the wins matter more than the losses. And that's why my rankings that I think about, I have Tennessee and Alabama above Ohio State. I think a 2-loss Tennessee can get in the college football playoff still because you know what? The SEC East should be considered the best division in all of football, hands down. And when you play in the best division and the best conference, you should get more leeway than the other conferences.
I see that you play a better competition, but let me put it this way. Let's say Georgia played in the WAC. They would still be Georgia. So even though they've steamrolled teams 60-0, you know, through this in the schedule, are we going to keep them out of the playoffs because they didn't play anybody?
To Tim's point, Clemson did that for years. They were one of the very best teams in the country, and they steamrolled a bad ACC.
So right, it doesn't. You can be a great team in a conference, you know.
Yeah, I understand that, but that's where the non-conference goes into play, depending on who you play in non-conference, and that's why Cincinnati got in last year. Was because they beat Notre Dame in non-conference play. Without that win, Cincinnati probably doesn't get in, and instead Oklahoma State gets in.
Yeah, well, every year, even the BCS, we always had pretenders, right? There's mismatches or whatever. Thank God we have 4 and we're going to 12. That's why I think we just need to give equal representation to the conferences, not stack 3, 4, 6 in one conference. That way we know. Again, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If I was an Alabama or I was a Georgia and I'm running the SEC, because we are just the big boys in the SEC, right? I don't want to play Georgia again or give LSU a shot. I want to go and beat the champion from the Big Ten, the champion from the Big 12, and the champion from the ACC and say, shut up. We won our conference. We smoked all of you guys. We are the national champs. While regardless of doing that or not, they probably still are the national. Well, they literally are the national champs. There's always people who go, well, I think we could have beat you. You left us out. You're a pretender. We're going to give the conference, like Mark, what you do. You've given multiple championships because teams didn't play each other. They had equal records. Why not do it on the field? That's the whole point of this playoff system. Instead of trying to game 4 or 5 teams in, because well, these are 4 or 5 best. We think, you know how you fix that? You put the best teams from the country in which they're doing now, the top 6, right? The top 5 conferences, is it? They put the top 5 in, and then it's settled on the field. And that's why this expanded playoff is going to shut all this crap up.
Yeah, but see, the problem with that, Tim,
we
is
played
you
everyone.
believe that there is some equality, even a little bit of equality among the conferences. In my opinion, the SEC is so far ahead of some of these other conferences, it doesn't matter. So what's going to happen is you're going to have LSU play Clemson, for example, and LSU can win by 17 points. And people are going to be like, LSU lost to Texas A&M, and they
hang on. LSU lost to South Carolina, right? We played Transitive World now. We got to use some tools. They lost South Carolina, didn't they?
No, they lost to Texas A&M.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I forget these bad teams at SEC. I forget when they beat the good teams.
Hold on. South Carolina is not a bad team.
It's confusing this year. Here's my point.
You got to admit, Tim, South Carolina has shown up the last 2 weeks.
And by the way, there's a really great South Carolina fan somewhere here in the chat, and he thought I was smacking on them. I'm not. I think you guys are showing out and had 2 great games, but I'm still not putting you in the playoffs, if you know what I mean. I'm just saying that
South Carolina, though, is a top 25 team. Can we agree on that?
Who?
South Carolina?
Yes.
I think they are. Yeah. After the last 2 wins, you have to put them in the top 25.
I had him there a week early.
He wants to be in this conversation, the Michigan man that was talking to me about the ACC.
I'm going to go like fix dinner or something. You guys just have that.
Well, Mark, I got a little beef with you too with our little mine and yours and Duriel's last conversation.
Oh,
and I'm right. I've been dying here listening to Tim, and I agree a lot with what Tim has to say. And this is my thing. And I'm going to ask you. I'm going to start.
Do you realize what happened, Ben, with the SEC results against the ACC over the weekend?
Yes, I do. I do.
Thank you.
I know. I've seen that. But that's what I have to ask you, though. Do you guys think, and this was coming, we're going to have to go with the last week's information. Let's start from last week's. What we were discussing last week. Did you, at that point, think that the SEC was literally twice as good than any other out of conference play than any other division?
I don't know how to measure twice as good.
What would you put a measurement on it?
And before we continue the conversation, do me a favor. Is there a way to back off your audio just a little bit? I think
Mark, you can turn the audio down a little bit. If you go on his audio, you can actually bring it down a little bit.
He's bring his audio down? Can I?
Yeah, if you go to
I can turn it down myself on this too.
Edit mic settings.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
All right. You can do that for future, Mark.
Very nice. Thank you.
All right. So what would you, if you gave it a number, what would you give it? They 50% better?
I'm just throwing out numbers here. Okay. So nobody crucify me in the chat here. We're just throwing out numbers.
Be cautious, because my point that I'm going to make is going to crucify you. I'm letting you know.
All right. I'm ready for it.
It better be over 100% better.
Ben, are you ready to debate me on whatever you want to debate me? I'm just making sure.
I am.
Are you ready this time?
I'm ready this time.
Okay. Let's say
it's a simple point.
let's say if the SEC's 100. Well, I've made this point over the last half of the season that it's difficult for me to distinguish the Big 12, the Big 10, the ACC, and the Pac-12. I think it's very close. So those are all between 80 and 90.
Okay.
And the SEC's 100 on a scale of 1 to 100. Not that they're perfect, but if we're going to make the best 100, then the other 4 are between 80 and 90.
So here's my simple point.
Yes.
So you're saying they're not. It's not a 2-to-1 ratio. It's not a double.
No.
Why are we affording conference? Now, we were talking about LSU being a conference champion winner, winning the championship with 2 losses and getting in over other teams that have 1 loss. Why are we affording LSU twice as many losses as anyone else and getting over them?
It's because they play. Here's why I will defend the SEC. It's because they play a tougher. And here's the thing. Also, I've been leaving out because I'm being a little bit disingenuous. When it comes to SEC, it's not about playing individual teams. It's playing quality team week in, week in, week in, week in. That has a toll on a couple of things. One, preparation. Two, your guys get smashed up. Three, you don't get to sit guys. There's a lot that goes into a schedule, and that I'm going to have to tip my hat to the SEC when it comes to not the warm-up game in November, which does kind of help, but I give them a little bit of pass on that because they play really good teams week in, week out. And playing teams back to back, that's why you have a letdown game. You play. I'd love to go back. We should look at. It'd be fun. I'm gonna do it after the show. I'm gonna look at LSU, who they played the 2 games before they got smoked. I'm gonna go look at these things. So you got to remember that, Ben. It's not these games aren't in a vacuum.
I haven't thrown my 1-2 punch here on this. That was my one punch. I need to know. I'm letting you know it's coming because I'm still gonna throw it. How is that? I mean, how do you justify that? Is that because of the schedule?
Okay. Would you agree? Oh, sorry, Mark.
And this is going from last week. I mean, we talked about it at length. Is there any? I mean, is that correct though? You still think LSU, according to last week, if they would have won out, they should have been in?
So Ben, the math doesn't work in this way. That let's say I'm right, and let's say the SEC is 100 and the Pac-12 is an 85. Mm-hmm. You can't allow a team into the playoff that has 1.85 losses. That doesn't exist.
But if they are a 2 versus 2, I can see.
Or they either have one loss or they have 2 losses.
Yeah, but I'm saying, I know. But let's say I say let the one loss team in, and if you are tied with a 2 loss, then they win the tiebreaker because they got that point whatever ahead.
Is this seriously what this discussion is about?
Well, no, but here's where I'm relating it to now. But I'm just saying I don't see it. I mean, even if all's even, I see if you're going to take out any bias. Looking at it mathematically, I don't see how you can put LSU. You could have put in that situation LSU in, but now here's my thing where I see like an inconsistency in logic is how does now when LSU could have won the SEC championship in yours and Darreel's eyes, and they could have got in the playoffs. How does Ohio State now not taking the championship? How do they jump Alabama? Because Alabama is a 2-loss team, and in the same division as LSU, has probably better out of conference wins. How does that same logic not apply for Alabama? Because Ohio State's a 1-loss team. The same thing as USC would have been a 1-loss team. The same as or TCU would have been. We were maybe throwing out TCU being a 1-loss team. Mm-hmm. How does Ohio State get in?
Ben,
and I don't even think that they should.
Ben, you're making this way too easy on me. You're making this way too easy.
I'm just wondering how that, what your thoughts are.
What 3 things would LSU have accomplished next week by winning the SEC championship game? They will have defeated the number 1 team in the country. They will have won an SEC championship game, and they will have won a extra data point and been 11-2 against Alabama's 10-2.
Okay. So the losses, and in this situation, the losses don't. I mean, you have to discount the losses in that.
Well, I don't discount any losses. Absolutely not.
I think if you win, to be clear, if you win the SEC, you're in. But I mean, then again, I'm the kind of guy that believes if you win the Big Ten, the Pac-12, the Big 12, but if you can't all fit in, there's a couple of conferences I'm giving it to. I'm going to give it to the SEC.
In the future, LSU can do whatever they want against UAB and Texas A&M the last 2 weeks and go and win the SEC championship and be in the playoff because all the conference champions are going to be in the playoff. But not today. They lost to Texas A&M. So 3 losses, they're done.
Who has a tougher schedule, Alabama or Ohio State?
Alabama.
Okay. And has Alabama been blown out?
No.
They're all close wins.
And both their losses are on the road.
I don't see how a beating Georgia compensates, even if it's a win. And what does the actual championship mean other than it says, hey, you're the championship? I mean,
Well,
I
it all
don't
depends on
see as
your
far as
perspective.
record and as far as how good your team is. If you are in the West, let's say if you're in the Big Ten West, and let's say Purdue goes in and beats Michigan.
Yep.
Just because that's the point I was making. Is just because they win and beat, does that mean that they're better than Michigan and they're the best team in the Big Ten? It means they got the championship title and they can be the champion.
What do you value? What do you value? Do you value conference championships, or are they completely irrelevant to you?
I don't. They are more irrelevant, especially the way the landscape is of football. Especially,
I'm just making sure of that.
Especially when you have the West, and because we know any good team could be any team on any given day. I mean, we can, there's teams have good days and bad days. So I mean, you could lose. You could be the best team and still lose a championship.
Okay.
And if you have a weak conference, like we say the Big Ten, Big Ten West, so I'm thinking, LSU beating Georgia because LSU had this, great game, and maybe Georgia's quarterback wasn't 100% or something like that, and they kind of rely on Stetson Bennett, and LSU goes in and wins. Does that mean LSU is this great team? Just because, I mean, they've already had big losses, but because they ended up in position.
Why are we playing games then? Why are we playing the games and relying on the results to determine?
Well, exactly though. But that's my point. The point is, then why don't losses matter? I mean,
they do matter.
Really, but not in the SEC's case. In this case, because you can lose an extra game in the SEC because you have all this other information that you're trying to boost the SEC up. And to me personally, it's not enough to count a whole game loss.
Well,
if you're looking at three loss to 2 loss teams, you're comparing 3 loss. I can see it being closer, but a 1 loss to a 2 loss team, that's twice as many losses. I mean, it just doesn't make. I mean, it does to me. It doesn't make. It doesn't. I don't see it.
Well, for one thing, it doesn't apply this year. LSU lost.
Yeah. But
right.
I mean,
and
even
Ben, I will give you some credit. I do agree that I don't care about conference championships in any way, shape, or form. Literally, I have absolute zero care. Like, whatever number you think of, I care less about it than that number. To me, it's just an extra data point. It's just an extra game. If you win your conference, it's just.
Okay, hang on. Can we back that up? The SEC, Mark, help me with this. I don't really follow the SEC to the Greeks. I don't worship that crap at all. My point of this is, hold on. How often do certain teams play each other? You guys go whole years without playing each other, correct?
Yes. Georgia still hasn't played Texas A&M at Texas A&M.
So in order to find out who's the best team in the SEC, you literally have to have a championship game. And even then, it's not really a shake, but at least it's an attempt to find a champion.
Right. Well, I don't think, oh, you're the champion, you automatically should be in some sort of playoff or something. No, I just think it's just an extra game. To me, it's just an extra regular season game that certain teams happen to play in.
So playing
That's the way I look at it.
So playing into a game by beating your conference, having the best record in one division, and now they got rid of divisions, which I'm glad with now as well. They should do. So the two teams, the 2 best records in the conference, playing each other is meaningless?
Well, it's not the 2 best records. It's usually not the 2 best teams either.
That's where everyone's going to, though. That's what I'm saying. I caught myself.
I think the way the Pac-12 does it is more valid.
Yeah, by the way the Pac-12 does it is more valid. But Michigan beating Purdue,
actually, I don't know,
doesn't mean anything to me. It has no change for me on Michigan or Purdue.
Is it more valid? I don't know, because what if you have the 2 best records? Let's say traditionally the East and West and SEC, right, Daryl? And the West beats the crap out of each other, and everyone's got bad records. And the 2 best records are in the East, but there's clearly maybe the 3rd and 4th best teams.
That's a good point. I mean,
well, that would be the exception, not the general rule.
Okay, this is college football. The exception happens.
I understand. Okay, in that exception, I will agree with you. But generally, that doesn't apply.
So here's what so let's face it. The money grab happened years ago when we went to these conference championship games. I agree, but it happened once we went past a 10-team conference, right? And we're not going to play enough games for everyone to play each other. That's when it all got screwed up, and that was a money grab. And
True.
we keep going for these money grabs. Again, the perfect thing. I love the Pac-10 back in the day. You played 9 conference games. You played everybody in your conference, and we knew exactly who the winner was.
The Big 12 right now plays the purest championship.
So that's the way it should. But they play a championship game, though. They should have stopped. I mean, that should be
Well,
it.
they got punished back in 2014. They got effectively punished because they didn't have the conference championship game in 2014.
Well, they got effectively punished because they didn't think ahead to determine how are we going to determine a champion. They didn't have a tiebreaker. They said, we got a split championship. Well, you idiots, they're not taking both of them, so they're going to take none of them. You split your championship.
But I mean, I think when you have these mega conferences that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, you don't play anybody. I'm sorry. It's just a little bit too disingenuous to say, well, listen, you know what? We're the best conference, so let's send 4 of our guys in. It's really, honestly, this thing got
What do you
broken.
mean by you don't play anybody?
Hang on a minute. Don't listen. Don't look at the message, not every word, and pick it apart. So my point to you is when we sold our souls to the devil in college football and started going these mega conferences where everyone play each other, is when it got messed up. And the fact that we somehow got, instead of having more conferences that are vital, right? Because they started plucking off, whole conferences went away, Big East, etc. If we had even like 6 teams, we could have a buy. You could have some kind of tournament somehow. But as soon as you got away from the conference champion, it should have been a playoff of conference champions. That's what it should have been, and it's just a mess now. And the reason why it's a mess is because ESPN. That's why it's a mess.
What I think, if I was going to restructure college football, I would make teams play like the Big 12, the way the Big 12 structures their conference, or the Pac-12 does their conference. Have a conference game, have 5 conference championships, and an 8-player playoff, 8-team playoff. I would have 5 teams from those conference champions, and then I would let a committee pick 3 wild cards, so they can decide with the outliers what these other 3 teams that should be in are, and that would be it.
Who do you put in the committee?
I mean, we got a committee, and it's not a bad.
And you were onto something good that sounded similar to what I've laid out there for many years, but then you drilled it into the ground with the committee.
Well, I just say the 3.
You don't need a committee.
I know you don't need a committee, but I'm just, there's, I don't know, maybe I like doing that, but then there has to be some hard, fast rule whether you put the other 3 teams in. I just think there's always going to be argument, so just let them pick. They want to pick, let them pick.
What's worrisome is anybody who's worked in a large organization knows that they make these committees, but 1 or 2 people control the committee. And so basically they pick what's going to happen.
No, that's
so
true.
When you have a committee involved, you shrink down the voting pool and they don't disclose any of the voting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That just sounds like
that's fascism. There are always louder voices in the room.
How do you pick those final 3 teams?
Then? Hey, Ben, how about we get rid of the conference championships and just have the 8 best teams in? Because you know what?
Based on
there could be a conference that has 4 teams better than another conference, and we shouldn't say, oh, well, your 4th best team can't get in, even though they're the number 8 team nationally, just because of where they play.
Who are the 8 best teams, though? We're going back to the poll. Why don't we just get rid of all the playoffs and just go back to a poll system, Daryl?
I'm fine with the +1 method, so that's fine with me.
Yes, but you still have to fill the bowls with spots based on what?
Conference affiliation.
But you have extra spots to fill.
No, I just have the bowls the way they are with the conference affiliations.
You've got 6 major bowl games, so you get 12 spots. How do you fill those spots after the conference champions?
Wouldn't you just do it like they're doing it now?
Yeah.
And then it would be great. It'd be great. And all the independents and all the G5 would get all mad at this. But it'd be great is if you made the 4 and 5 play in, almost like the first in basketball, and then you just have a 4-team tournament with the Power 5. What? And if you want to bitch that if you want to complain that you're 4, not 3, at least you have an opportunity to play. And then that way we know you have 5 conference champions, and we know that the conferences decide it, and you have it. You have a conference championship game. So the 2 best teams in each conference play each other. That's a whole nother round of playoffs.
Yep. That
would be clean. You know why it's not going to happen? There's not enough games and money in it. But if you want to get to the purest form in the given 5 Power 5 that we have right now, That is the cleanest way you could decide a champion on the field.
And the SEC also would throw a fit because they only have one representative.
Win your conference. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, why?
And this year more than ever, it shows that there's no massive super conference. The massive super conference. Maybe you had an argument a couple years ago. Sorry, definitely had an argument. You probably could have had an all SEC championship a couple times. But what I am going to say to you is that league's shrinking, and I do believe with NIL and a lot of things going on right now, conference realignment, I do think that's going to change. And new TV contracts, a lot of that's going to change.
I'm sure Alabama, Georgia, they're just very worried. They're very worried about Michigan, Ohio State. I'm sure they're shaking in their boots down there.
They should be.
The SEC has been the best conference for like 20 years and will probably continue to be the best conference going forward. I don't see any way they're not the best conference. I'm sorry.
I do. It's called NIL. Now we get to pay our players.
Darrell, we've seen signs of them
the second year of NIL. We're going on the first full year, and look at the recruiting classes.
I'm going to tell you,
at the top, it's a lot of SEC.
We've seen signs of them shaking in their boots already. Did you see the way they were going at it over NFL NIL already? We have two major coaches, two major programs going at it at each other over the way the NIL is, because they are worried. I'm sorry, but they are.
Not just that, but what school has done the best with NIL? What school has taken on that subject more than any other?
Before we go down that road, can I say something, please?
Yeah, you can say whatever.
Okay. The effects of this NIL deal will not be overnight, because 5-star freshmen don't make an impact on the field right away. And also, you're going to slowly, this will be a slow process. And not everybody pays players. All the top programs pay players. But some programs have been alleged to give a lot of money for people to come to their school in the past. A lot. And it tends to be the schools where their academics are not nearly as important as their football program. And come at me with the Reggie Bush stuff, but that dude wasn't paid to come to USC. That's well documented. Have there been players? Yes. But if we're all going to sit here and say that the SEC has not been getting a lot of money for people to come into their programs, it's been whispers and smoke around this for years. So to sit back and say that it's not a factor in what's been going on is just silly. And I think one of the biggest things going to happen now is now that everybody with some deep pocket alumni are allowed to pay players to come. Well, sorry, say allowed in quotes, that are going to have kids come to play through shadow companies and stuff. It's going to make a lot of that talent that's going directed towards 3 or 4 schools. Look at the A&M, even within your conference. A&M was not winning recruiting championships over Alabama, Georgia, and LSU, but a little bit of money's changed even that. That's going to continue. It's not going to happen overnight. I could be totally wrong, but the odds are I'm right. It's going to balance out a lot of the shady crap that's been going on for years, and we'll see who the best teams are.
Well, the thing is, Tim, I mean, and none of us have a crystal ball, but I will, to what Darrell is talking about, they're scared, and I know they got some concerns about it. That's bottom. I mean, there is concerns because this whole NIL thing is shaking up a lot of what these big schools and been successful. Alabama's got the most to lose, and they are worried about it. You can see Nick Saban was worried about it this year. I mean,
visually see it.
Yeah, but you could visually see it. And he's got a right to. He's got reason to be concerned because they're looking at. We're all looking at new territory. All these programs have to reevaluate because if somebody else gets ahead, it's smaller schools and other schools' chance to take advantage of something. And see something that, because college football has been done a certain way for so long, and now it's changing. And anytime that happens,
there's a chance it stays like it is, Darrell, but I would say the odds are you can't change this many mechanisms. There were a lot of built-in, and I know maybe you will, maybe you won't, but most of us know there have been a lot of built-in mechanisms. And yes, the SEC is the best conference, but how they become that best conference? There's when you talk about big TV contracts, there's a lot that you can do with that. Free advertising, hyping. There's a lot that goes along with some of the stuff that's been happening in college football that is going to start to level out. And it's clear that the SEC has been a dominant program over the past at least decade and a half, I'll give you. but I'm not going to go as far as to say that they're going to continue because SEC, because that logic is just so tired. I can't do it anymore.
Well, the SEC is adding probably the two premier schools in football left. Other USC and UCLA, I don't think is as good as addition to the Big Ten as Texas and Oklahoma combined. Now USC is probably the best of the four, but Oklahoma and Texas is probably second and third, and then UCLA's fourth.
One thing I'll say about the SEC, looking to their futures, SEC positioned themselves well as far as the last 20 years. They set themselves up for success, the whole conference. And whoever ran that conference was a genius. And I in my opinion.
Yeah, but how much of it was above water? They did certain things, right? Like scheduling, brilliant. Other conferences, stupid.
I'm there's
a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, but for me, from a business, just looking at it from a business standpoint, I think
because football is religion for these schools, because some of these schools, football is all that they have. No offense.
Yeah, a lot of these schools, states don't have pro teams.
Not just that, but I mean the actual schools themselves. There are not many Stanfords in, there's Vanderbilt, right? But then once you get outside that, Tony pretty eloquently put that all together. And I'm not crapping on it. Do you know what I mean? It still doesn't take away from being dominant and awesome in football. I'm just saying there's some built-in advantages, and there have been some very smart things going back to Slythe and Sankey, that what they've done that have clearly paved the path for 10 years of dominance, just dominance. But to think that that's going to continue and perpetually because SEC, I think is a bit naive. So much has changed in the past 3 years that's going to challenge that.
It's exciting, that's for sure.
Okay, so it's changed so much in the last 3 years, but throughout that entire time, the SEC has been the best conference. I just think the SEC's got such a big gap that even if the Big Ten slightly closes in, that the SEC is just so far ahead that they're still going to be pretty far behind.
But they're not, Darrell. This year is going to show that. They really aren't that far ahead.
The SEC's pretty far ahead.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it. Is A&M a good team?
They're talented, but on the field, I wouldn't call them good.
What the SEC had for years is they had 3 or 4 teams at the top that were going to beat everybody, it seemed like to me. And I don't see that this year. Do you?
Yeah, I see a bunch of good teams in the SEC.
I do,
I see
but not
8 or 9 teams in the SEC that
you're not. No.
Probably top
My question
25.
was there were teams at the top of the SEC, like multiple teams at the top of the SEC, at least 2 that were clearly the 2 best teams in the country, right?
Right.
Okay. I don't see that this year. And I'm not, by the way, for starts cracking. No, USC is not one of the teams I'm talking about. All right. USC doesn't have the roster. In 1 year, they don't have the roster to compete with the Georgia. No, they're not going to, or even in Alabama, I think. But what I am talking about is other teams that have been, like OSU, have been building rosters. Like Michigan, who has under what Harbaugh's doing is he's making Stanford East again. He's making this powerful run game that's running over these spread out defenses and stuff with elite athletes, but he's just smashing them like he did to the Pac-12. So you had one side, you had Oregon with the Chip Kelly blur, and the other side, and then you had Harbaugh with his smash. If you're in the middle, what defense are you trying to set up to stop both of these offenses? So I don't think that the SEC is just going to run away with it, or the top 2 teams in the SEC are going to be dominant over the other conferences. I just don't see that this year. And it might be the beginning of something. I agree with
everything you say, but the SEC it's not just the best 2 teams. Because if it was just the 2 best teams, then probably the Big Ten is the best conference. But it's about every team. And currently, 1 through 14, it's the SEC.
We've gone over it, and Mark's put it down, but the data points, there aren't enough data points. I'd be curious to see what the Bulls look like. But the problem with the Bulls now is there's so many people sitting out. You really don't know anymore on who the best teams are in the Bulls anymore.
Yeah, and I don't like the opt-outs.
It's just an eyeball test. And everyone's just doing eyeball tests. And to say that the top half of the SEC is going to be dominant over the other conferences, I think this year is just wrong.
I
There
mean,
aren't enough data
look at
points to say
the
otherwise.
wins that even the average SEC teams have this year. It's pretty impressive compared to the others.
Give me a couple because I don't follow the SEC that tight.
Well, Kentucky just beat Louisville pretty good.
Yeah, Kentucky beat Louisville.
The Utah
That did not help my point.
again. The Utah loss was more of a Utah loss than a Florida win, in my opinion. We could all have our opinions. I don't think that Florida's better than Utah. I don't think 90% of America thinks that Florida's better than Utah because they're not.
Well,
They
you may
won.
think that, but
Congratulations, you won the game, but you're not a better team.
Yeah, that's why they play the game.
We did see Florida play a pretty good ball game last weekend against Florida State, and we do know that they're not anywhere close to being the best team in the SEC, and Utah is much closer to being the best team in the Pac-12. So it's a pretty impressive showing.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't bring Florida State into it because LSU did lose to Florida State too.
Yeah. But also, Mark, I would counter that with that if it wasn't played on a neutral field. It's not played on a neutral field.
We have hardly any results the entire season that are played on neutral fields.
What's the score? What's the score if Florida goes into Rice-Eccles?
We don't know, but we do know what the score was when Utah went to Florida. They lost.
I think we got a pretty good idea, and also is on neutral field.
Tim, I am guessing that if
I heard the argument by the way yesterday,
I'm guessing that if the Pac-12 had won the 3 games against the SEC, that the SEC won against the Pac-12, that you would be talking up those 3 games, correct? If Oregon beat Georgia,
Mark, I can look you right in the eye and say, you know what, Mark, I'm saying they're data points because I wouldn't be because none of those wins were over. Oh wait, if Oregon had beat Georgia,
if Oregon beat Georgia and Arizona beat
that's a whole different conversation.
And
the other games aren't really that important.
Sure, they are.
But that
those
game
teams are in the conference, just like Oregon and Georgia are in those 2 respective conferences.
What was the third one? Mississippi State over ASU or something? What was that game?
Mississippi State beat Arizona.
Arizona. Okay, I mean, you know, we can go through piecemeal.
But it's a football game between 2 teams in those 2 conferences.
But it doesn't say which. But it doesn't say what conference is better. It's too small. But it is not even close. It's not even close to a sample size large enough to say which conference is better.
Absolutely.
It says that team's better than that team on that day is what it means.
Absolutely.
At that place.
But I don't think there's any question Mississippi State's a better football team than Arizona.
Agreed. Is there any question that Florida is a better team than Utah?
That's debatable.
Okay. I
think that Utah is probably better, but Florida won the game. So that there has to be some recognition of that.
That logically that shows that they were the better team on that day in that location. It doesn't mean they're a better team. There's some recognition of it, but it doesn't mean. But it's a data point.
So why are we playing the games?
That's a non-conference game. It's almost irrelevant.
It's almost irrelevant
as far as the big picture of why do we play the games.
How do we evaluate these teams in these conferences if we're not going to look at the games that they play against each other?
We make guesses. We make guesses. So right. So let me ask this question, Mark. Last year, when and I remember your words exactly, when Oregon beat Ohio State, in the shoe, you know what your response pretty much was? I'll paraphrase it. Do you remember what you said? You kind of dismissed that game.
I didn't dismiss that game at all. I ranked Oregon ahead of Ohio State for the next 5 or 6 weeks until they lost 2 other games. I ranked Oregon above Ohio State, even though I thought Ohio State was a better team because Oregon won the game. You can look at my rankings. You can go through every week.
Did you give the Pac-12 credit for that win? The Pac-12?
Sure, I gave them a ton of credit.
Yes, they deserve credit for that win.
But when the entire conference went 3-19 against, then obviously that one Oregon-Ohio State game doesn't outweigh a completely pathetic performance by the entire conference. It's one data point.
Well, I want to actually end this. I get out of here with you guys. I want to. One thing is, I don't, Mark. I agree with you with Ohio State. I think if TCU or USC drops another game, Ohio State should be in over Alabama. I don't disagree with that. I don't want to make that clear, but I don't understand where you guys are coming from with the LSU being in.
Because I believe conference champions should be in the playoff. That's what I believe.
Gotcha.
You guys believe just data points, and I get that. That's fine.
Whoa.
Except for you, Tim.
I don't.
I would have Tennessee potentially in the playoffs still. Because they beat Alabama head-to-head, so.
Should a team that lost like that, like, let's say historically, let's be real here, right? Does a team like that belong to be considered as the national champion when you don't lose?
It happened before.
Listen, historically, teams would lose games just because they lost to a certain team. If someone lost by like 25, 30 points to someone, that was it. You were not winning the national champion. Someone show me. Yeah.
I tweeted this out the other day because, of course, people were jumping on me about Ohio State, which I was not claiming Ohio State should be in the playoff. Actually, I tweeted out Ohio State should not be in the playoff. But anyway, if other teams drop, then they're the one left there that's got the best resume and the best record.
Like, basically, you're saying they should be in over Alabama if there comes a situation.
I'm basically saying that Ohio State team that I saw on Saturday should not be competing for a national championship. But if we're selecting the 4 best teams in the country, and that's still going to be the format in 3 weeks, if USC and TCU, they lose, well, by default, Ohio State's going to be sitting there. And for as bad as they looked in the fourth quarter against Michigan, they still have the best resume out of all those other teams over the course of 12 games. So by default, they're going to be in the playoff, or I believe they should be in the playoff. But I sent a list of teams that had very bad results in the regular season on their resume and still made the playoff. You had a 2015 Oklahoma team that lost to a 5-7 Texas team. You had a 2015 Michigan State team that lost to a 5-7 Nebraska team. You had I had a few other ones. You had teams lose to bad teams, and they still made the playoff.
Well, one, that's playoff era. It was what we're talking about. But 2, did they get smoked by those teams? Sorry, sorry. I'm not talking about Ohio State right now. I'm just talking about other teams that have been blown out. And I agree with you, Mark, to the point of Ohio State and the fact that I think Jim Knowles did a great thing. But in the end, it was showed that Ohio State's defense has some serious flaws. Would you agree?
Yes. And
again, part of that is the fact that they're playing a good, let's put in perspective also, they have some serious flaws against a good team. They're not going to have those flaws against a subpar team, but against a top 10 offense, they're going to have those things, those cracks will be shown. But that doesn't mean that they're not a playoff quality team. I have the issue with, kind of like you, is that championships matter. And that's why I'm even giving TCU credit, because I don't see TCU's wins as that great.
Can only matter to a point, because LSU goes and beats Georgia. Does LSU get in? No, right?
Well, they're not going to be one of the 4 best champions.
Yeah, but that's what I was. And that's that was part of my argument that I was making. I mean, they could have been considered. Does a 2-loss LSU make them the better champion over a 1-loss USC?
Well, that's what we like about that. That's what the new system is going to be. It's going to reward the top 5, the top 4 and 5. Actually, gone to 5th. The top 5 conference champions are rewarded. And that's what I do like about the one thing redeeming about the 12.
And one other note about Ohio State that I'll make, and then I'll stop my defense of Ohio State, which actually I've not made a defense. I tweeted out they shouldn't be in the playoff. But yeah, their defense got torched in the fourth quarter. They played a pretty good game until late in that game. There are a lot of teams that are going to be in the playoff or strongly considered for the playoff that have had horrible defensive performances. Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, USC, Utah, not that they're a playoff caliber team, but all these teams that are top-notch teams in their conferences, Oregon, TCU, Clemson gave up 45 points to Wake Forest. All these teams have gotten torched at some point in the season, right?
Not USC.
USC hasn't looked.
Not Michigan. Not Georgia.
UCLA. They gave up 45 points to UCLA.
Yeah, but they scored 48.
I'm not talking. I'm talking. You were focusing on the Ohio State defense being a flaw. USC got torched by Cal, by Arizona.
Hold on. If we're gonna do fourth quarters, for Ohio State, you can't use Cal because Cal scored those 21 points on an onside kick, a busted play, and then that was a weird
play. That's a bad defense.
But it was the fourth quarter. Yeah, they had some backups in, Mark. You guys didn't have backups in. It was a tight game.
Wait a minute.
USC was up by 20 points. Mark,
in that game, they only lost by 5 points.
USC was up by 20 points at halftime and 20 points in the fourth quarter. Did you know that?
They won the game by 5 points.
Yeah, I understand that point. Did you realize that USC was up by 20 points at the halftime?
Sure.
And 20 points forward, and they brought their backups in. They connected on a long play, then an onside kick. And Mark, let me finish. So it was a close game against Cal because they were up 20 points in the fourth quarter. Cal connects, and they put their backups in. Cal connects on a long 50-yard touchdown pass, onside kick, and score another touchdown.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it got close.
And Cal is one of the worst teams in the country, and Michigan is one of the very best teams in the country.
It was against our Mark. It was against our backups, not our starters.
Pointing out that Ohio State getting torched on defense is not anything different than Clemson, USC, TCU, Tennessee, Alabama, all those teams getting torched, LSU, all getting torched at some point this season on defense. All of them.
I'm talking about torched in a loss.
Oh.
Like meaning the margin is massive. You see what I'm saying?
Well, USC's defense got torched against UCLA.
Yeah, which UCLA is one of the best offenses in the country. Might possibly their offense might be better than Michigan's. Might be better.
Might be. I am just making the point that Ohio State is getting blasted, and rightfully so, for its defense getting killed in the fourth quarter, which it did. But all these other playoff teams or near playoff teams have had similar performances this year.
One thing I want to ask about this Ohio State thing. Ohio State had, as their defense is concerned in that game, they had to sell out to stop the run. Because they had to do that. They had to sell out to do that.
They thought they did.
They thought they did.
We don't know that they did.
Yeah, okay. But
that was their strategy.
So that's what they did.
Yep.
So we don't know the other side too. If they didn't do that, Michigan may have just gashed them on the run like they did everybody else. So I mean, those big plays. I just only thing is I hate diminishing the big plays that Michigan did because that's what Ohio State thought they had to give up.
I'm not diminishing Michigan.
Okay.
I am diminishing the other teams in the country that I basically gave everyone a list of teams that at some point this season, their defenses have been torched.
Go back and I'm going back to this again. I'm talking about teams that giving up a lot of points, a lot of yards. Has Ohio State given up a lot of yards and won and points in the season? Have they had any shootouts?
Penn State moved the ball against them.
So what I'm looking at here is teams that got boat raced in a quarter when their starters were in. I think I've gave plenty of platitudes to Knowles and Ohio State for what they did against that offense. And I didn't say that you guys are a bad team or a bad defense or anything. I said it was exposed as a serious flaw. That's all I said. And if you think I'm up here saying that USC is Georgia on defense, I'm not. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I liked what I've been seeing with the players we have on defense and them stopping. The fact that we're in games is because I think we probably have the best offense. We could argue you and me who has the better offense, but I think USC has the best offense in the country. And that can, like Ohio State, can sometimes get you out of some holes. And it has. But to say that some teams, we could excuse big losses to tight games, I don't think it's the same because the games are played slower. Games are, the USC's offense puts a lot of stress on the defense, and teams that play like USC's offense and score fast put a lot of stress. So the numbers, when people say, oh, look how many yards they give up, that's because the other teams on the field a hell of a lot because we're scoring fast. I mean, these are just things, right? Nothing's a vacuum, and they all happen. I think that Ohio State and what Knowles has done is a very good defense. I think, to your point, Ben, I'm not taking away from what JJ and he was throwing the ball long. That's been the hit on him, right? That he can't throw the ball long ball. Well, he was throwing it pretty good in that game. I'm not taking anything away from either one of those teams. And the fact that it's just when you have that defense and you made them do that, Michigan made plays. That was the difference in the game.
Okay. We've got like 3 other people that are going to jump on here.
All right, Mark, thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Nice talking to you, Tim, Jareel.
Thanks, Ben.
Continue this conversation another day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mark, if you can, after the show, hit that
Well, I
email.
can do it right now. So you're telling me that I should have an email with a code?
I'll do it right now because actually it's time, so I'll do it right now.
Yeah, I can do it right now. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks to Real. All right, let's move this along. We've been on forever. So we got Chris. Chris, thanks for being here. Chris left us. We'll go to Larry. Larry, what's going on tonight? Hello, Larry. I guess Larry's not going to join us. Larry. Okay, going once.
I'm here.
Hey, Larry. How's it going?
Hey, I heard you. I was like, I'm here. So, not much. I have to agree with Tim on a lot of it. I think blowouts should matter. I really do.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if it's so much to say, flaws or whatever. It's just consistency. The reason you have Alabama, Georgia, even the 19 LSU, these teams that are the top teams, it's because they're consistent.
Sure.
And when you get blown out, it shows that you're not a consistent team. So
absolutely. I was pointing out that there have been teams that have bad losses that have been selected for the playoffs.
Right. Like I remember Ohio State losing to Purdue. It wasn't quite a blowout, but I mean, that was probably one of the biggest shocking upsets I can remember over the last decade of football. Yep. And then also for DeRill, who's better, South Carolina or Florida?
Well, they played and Florida won.
Right. So that, and it's really strange to actually start seeing a little more parity in the SEC this year because a lot of conferences have had that parity. You've got, the Big Ten over the last, 10 years has had Wisconsin, Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan have all been, competitive and they could cannibalize each other. Mm-hmm. And the SEC has just
dominated the conference, though. Those other teams have been on the same plane, but Ohio State's wiped the rest of them out.
Right. Yeah, they have. Michigan State had a decent run. Penn State was doing decent, but it's just, for once this year is probably the most parity that I've seen in the SEC. And it's just, I see, Florida gets waxed by Vanderbilt, but they go down to Tennessee, give them a heck of a game. Kentucky's played great. They've also lost. South Carolina, Mississippi State, Ole Miss. It's one of these years where it's like any given day, those guys can beat each other. And the other thing too is, the SEC, I can't say they aren't the best conference, but they also play 8 conference games and they'll schedule 1 P5. And I give Georgia the most credit because they'll schedule some of the best P5s. But the rest of them, you have 8 conference games. You have 4 cupcakes. They rarely even get a great G5 team. And so, to that point, there's almost built in 4 wins. Like we were saying, for those guys to.
Well, that's a bit of a stretch. They all schedule somebody difficult, and about 5 teams that I can count schedule 2 difficult games. So Georgia's got Georgia Tech and Oregon. Florida's scheduled Florida State and Utah.
Correct. That's So some of these teams do, and Texas, but they don't travel. They don't travel, Mark. That's a difference. You can schedule a team to go 4 time zones in your backyard.
True. You're right.
That's the other thing. I keep having to point to LSU going to UCLA last year. And sure, UCLA or LSU wasn't a great team, but they were also a bowl team. UCLA lost quite a few games as well. So, when they travel, it's just a different story. Alabama, who everybody gets credit for beating this year, goes down to Texas, and we all saw that game. Mm-hmm. So, but who is Texas lost to as well? So I just think there's a little more parity. I think when the game's played, where it's played, I think it's really hard. Like we're talking about data points, who's better? I think on neutral fields, it would be different. Just my opinion.
Of course it would be different, but we've got to go by the games that are played. And I would say this, that what the SEC has done over recent history is played a ton of neutral site games. That's what they've done. Alabama, LSU, Georgia, they play a lot of these neutral site games that typically favor them because they're played in the South. They're playing it in Atlanta, New Orleans, Dallas. And yeah, they haven't traveled. The other conferences all travel more than the SEC. That's a fact.
Correct. Yeah, and that's my point. The West Coast teams will go all the way out there, and I'll give Big Ten credit. They don't mind coming out. They'll go anywhere. And to me, it's just, but you don't want to see neutral site games either. You do want them at college stadiums.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when it's, like the Peach Bowl, having an SEC team playing in the Peach Bowl every year is just a huge disadvantage to me. I would almost, but it makes it easier for the fans. So it makes sense, but it's just a disadvantage in my opinion.
Yeah. Now the SEC is starting to travel. If you look at future schedules.
Correct.
And yeah, I see that Alabama finally went, like you mentioned, they went to Texas this year. That's the first time they've gone anywhere since 2011.
Right. And I went to the Florida game. I'm a Ute. And, Florida, since 97 is going to play an out-of-conference team outside of Florida since 97, I think.
91.
Or 91.
Seriously.
Yeah, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
And so... it'll obviously I live in Florida now, but that would be a fun game to go to. And I like these out of conference matchups when you have these P5s. And I really like the fact of, like, growing up, I played sports. You won your area, you went to district, you won district, you went to state. I don't know why we can't have this in college football. We have it in every other sport. You advance. It's not a invitational. It's a win to get in.
Yeah.
And so,
and it hurts the sport to not represent the entire country.
And it also could open up avenues to more out of conference games. Like George Klatt said, why in the heck would Oregon schedule Georgia? There's teams that can get eliminated just based on traveling 4 time zones. I mean, obviously they just got smashed, but like Utah, why did they play Florida? Why didn't they just play an Iowa State or a Rutgers? It's a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, some of these teams are choosing to travel that far and play in somebody's backyard. So that's just my 2 cents on it. Sorry for your loss. I know that probably had to hurt you yesterday.
Well, not nearly as much as it did at other stages in life. It doesn't impact my life, so it's not the end of the world.
Have you done a video on the hot seat of Ryan Day, or are you going to do one?
Oh, I've thought about it.
Because I would really be interested to hear your take on it. I think you're dialed in. I mean, you're a homer, but you're not. This is a job, and I can tell. And I'd like to see a video.
Okay. All right.
So, okay. Well, I appreciate you, Mark.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for jumping on. Thanks for waiting. I know that we had the other 3 on forever, and I know people are waiting patiently. So,
okay. All right.
Thanks, Larry. Have a good night.
You bet. You too.
All right. We also have Dr. C. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. What you got going?
Not much, it's been a really interesting conversation with Dario and Tim, and you guys debate, Pac-12 versus SEC, basically, who's the best. And both of my teams, Arkansas and USC, so I watch both, right?
Sure.
And I love Pac-12 football because it's fun, it's explosive, and the teams don't get the credit they deserve. And I think part of it's because they play at 10 and 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
I think that yesterday, what was it, BYU and who was playing BYU? It was a Pac-12. It was like
Stanford.
It was at 11 at night. It started over here in Central Time. I doubt someone in the East Coast is going to be watching a football game at midnight on a Saturday night, unless they really don't like sleep. It was insanely late. But back to my point. So I was looking at the whole conferences, and I think it's a pretty easy way to another way to debate this is just I put the SEC teams 1 through 12 on one side and the Pac-12 teams 1 to 12 on the other side.
Yeah.
And I mean the SEC hands down, wins the games. Like for instance, there's Georgia 1, USC 1. I'd give that to Georgia. Tennessee 2, Washington 2. I'd give it to Tennessee. Alabama versus Oregon 3-3. Alabama. LSU versus Utah. That would be an interesting game.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd give it to LSU. Ole Miss versus Oregon State. Another close game. That's kind of a coin flip.
Maybe.
Mississippi State at 6 versus UCLA at 6. That's also a close game. I'd give it to Mississippi State, though. 7, South Carolina versus Washington State at 7. I'd give it to South Carolina. Kentucky at 8 versus Arizona. Kentucky. Florida at Arizona State. Florida. Arkansas. Florida at Cal. Florida. Arkansas at Arizona State. Arkansas. Missouri at Stanford. Missouri. And Texas A&M versus Colorado. Texas A&M.
Yeah, you're showing the depth of the SEC because
Yeah.
they win the final 5 or 6 games. Now, obviously, just because you say that they win doesn't mean that they would win.
Right.
It's just an interesting exercise. It doesn't prove anything because somebody else could come on here and say the exact opposite. But I can't disagree with your estimations there.
Yeah, I have the SEC winning 10-2 against the Pac-12.
Who did you take out of the SEC?
Who did I take as giving the Pac-12 a win?
You had to take out 2 SEC teams.
Yeah. I gave Oregon State the win over Ole Miss.
No, you took out 2 SEC teams.
Yes, only
Who
2.
were they?
And that was Ole Miss and Mississippi State.
No. You took 2 teams out of the league. There are 14 teams in the SEC.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Pardon me. Texas A&M because, and then I don't know who the other team. I just put the 12 versus 12, top 12 versus top 12.
Oh.
Yeah.
So basically, okay. Anyway, yeah, that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff.
So 10-2, I think that was kind of a fair assessment. It just, the Pac-12 very underrated, but the SEC is the king of football. Still is.
Sure.
It's a down year.
Yeah.
But it's still, even on a down year, it's still better.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. That's all I got, Mark, but I just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for that.
Course. Hey, I'm the real MVP's favorite caller tonight, though. I imagine so.
10-2. And I've done that in the past where I've put and I simply state this means nothing.
Yeah.
This is just sheer opinion. There's nothing to back it up against except for the actual results that we have on the field. It's just an interesting exercise to throw up any conference against any other conference and see them across the board and say 1 plays 1, 2 plays 2, who wins those games. And I think it's even more fair. I don't know if fair is the word or gives it a better context if you say, because a lot of those games are are difficult to make a judgment call and say if
Yeah.
they only played one, it's a toss-up. But to say, hey, if they played 10 times or if they played 100 times, which way is this going? Georgia, USC, is this 60-40? Is it 70-30? Is it, what is the difference between these two teams? Not just Georgia wins the game, but how many times, how often do they win this game?
Well, like Utah doesn't lose at home. The only teams I think that could beat Utah is Georgia and maybe Tennessee when they were on fire.
Yeah.
But Utah is one of the most difficult teams to beat at Utah.
Yeah, we think that.
I think so.
I have a bit of an exception. I agree it's a difficult place to play.
Uh-huh.
But is Utah defeating teams outside the Pac-12 at home? The answer is no.
I know.
The answer is that they haven't played anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly ever.
Yeah, that too is a factor. But if that Utah versus Florida game would have been played at Utah, I don't know. I'd favor Utah if they played it again.
Sure, I think most people would, but they didn't play there. So we don't know.
Exactly. But it's fun, man. I'm so excited that there's a little bit more parity this year, and the Pac-12 looks like it's coming back. I mean, SC, like Tim was saying, watch out when they get a defense. They're going to recruit defensive players, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with for the next, couple of years.
Hey, man.
This is exciting.
Yep. Thanks for dropping by. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Have a good night. All right. To finish us up tonight, and then I'll get to the super chats. We got Chris on the line. Chris, what's going on?
You saved the best for last, Mark.
Absolutely, I did.
I'm just teasing. Oh, I don't know. I enjoyed you made like an apology for putting me, or not for putting me on, but for patient callers like me.
Absolutely.
I guess.
I'm sorry about that.
Don't ever apologize, Mark. I think you're the star of the show. If you want my opinion, I mean, you're not punishing me by not letting me throw my 2 cents in, which is probably about what it's worth anyway.
Well, unfortunately, the more people that watch, the more people that call in, and that's a great thing. That's what we want. We want larger and larger audiences, but then more people call in, and then if we want to have meaningful conversations with people, then those last. Or we could start just doing some kind of rapid fire where we just bring people on for 30 seconds and get rid of them and move on to the next person.
It kind of reminded me of the Around the Horn with I mean, each person kind of threw in there, and then with Tony Reali or whoever, you don't need him there necessarily, but that's kind of the impression. I mean, it made a good impression is what I'm trying to tell you. So that's why I said he shouldn't really apologize. I thought being waiting was a good thing, because now I can kind of throw my 2 cents in, but just to kind of maybe just add just a little bit. I don't know if it's probably already been talked about a little bit, but these conference title games, I actually kind of think that they should weigh a little bit more. Not because I think they mean anything more, but like you said, Purdue and Michigan. If Purdue can go and beat Michigan, I think that changes the whole. I'm not necessarily saying that promotes Purdue to being a playoff contender necessarily, but if they can actually go out there and throw a wrench in the machinery there, then at that point, then you can start, like you already talked about it, but then you can start weighing into consideration whether maybe an Alabama, LSU. Or, it doesn't necessarily have to be those teams, but that's not necessarily, I mean, that's probably what I think makes the regular season more meaningful are these, I'll just call them wrinkles. We don't want to iron out all these wrinkles. I mean, people, what was it, Tim? And I'm not picking on Tim. I like Tim. He's a good guy. But, he's like, oh no, just throw him in all the conference title lists. And that takes, and he's like, that'll, then we don't have to second guess. And I'm not sure it's ever been that simple though. I mean, even this year, even though I know we saw the result, we saw Ohio State, they're not probably going to be most likely. And, I'm not going to put the death nail in them. I think they still might get another chance, which if they do, more power to them. But, we already kind of know who the better team is, at least on that day. And same thing with Oregon or whoever team you want to throw in there. Do we really want to see Tennessee? Who was it Tennessee lost to? Was it Alabama? I can't remember, but we don't need to necessarily see, or Georgia, I guess is what it was. We don't need to see that game again, really, to kind of figure out who the better team is, do we?
Well, Tim's point is that he believes that the various conferences, therefore the various different geographies in the country, the different areas in the country should be represented somewhat equally.
Sure.
Therefore, if you have a conference, and his earlier point, which I completely agree with, before these conferences got too large, you had 10 teams in a conference. Therefore, everyone could play everyone within a conference. Therefore, it legitimized the conference champion as the best team in that conference because everyone played everyone. Therefore, why not take that team as the conference champion and let them represent that conference in that area of the country in the playoff?
Well, okay. Can I add a little bit to that? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I think it was Drill MVP said, well, that you know, the reason that's why supposedly, you know, that's why Texas Christian didn't advance, I guess, the season that they went like they beat Mississippi real bad in the Peach Bowl, I think. Well, they didn't advance because they didn't play. Well, you know, they did play for a championship. You know, I don't agree with that. I mean, I'm not going to pick on him really, but you know, you beat Baylor, you're in. I mean, it's kind of that simple. You don't need to play them twice, really, to prove that you're better than them. You beat them the one time that you
Baylor beat them.
Oh, is that what? Okay, well, whoever it was then. I don't. I guess I'm lost as far as I thought it was Baylor that beat them, but anyway,
Baylor lost another game to West Virginia.
Okay, it was Western Virginia. Okay,
they tied for the championship. First,
well, Baylor, but it wasn't a head-to-head. I think Baylor actually beat Texas Christian that year, didn't they? Anyway, it was a game that Texas Christian probably should have won, but didn't. And that's kind of where I'm kind of, yeah, we could have had another game, throw the two back in there and see how it rolls. But, you know, actually, just from my perspective, this isn't to like throw anybody else's perspective out of whack or whatever, but I think we kind of knew who the better team was. I think it was Baylor. So maybe Baylor should have been in there somewhere. I could maybe see that point maybe being made, but you know, the fact that neither went to it wasn't really about the playoff, really. I mean, to say that's the playoffs' fault, I don't know that that's really true. I mean, both of them knew what they had to do to be in, and neither one did what they had to do, is the way I look at it. And the result of that is that gave Ohio State, and then deservedly, in my opinion, that gave Ohio State the chance to advance. And I don't know, not just because they won the championship. I mean, I think they deserve to be there anyway. And so kind of where my point is, it's like, yeah, we could include every conference champion, maybe even include the smaller schools. But I don't know that that's going to necessarily change. Well, I mean, it does change it, but it's not necessarily going to end in a better result, I guess, than what we're getting right now is the way I look at it. You can go ahead and tell me what you think of it.
No, I think you have some valid points. I would like to see all the conference champions in a playoff. And then I want to see a systematic way, not a committee, but a systematic way of which I've outlined in the past, determine the other best teams in the country to fill out, whether that's an 18 playoff or I'm not a big fan of a 12-team playoff because buys are included and they should not be. So either 8 or 16 teams.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we could draw the line anywhere, I guess. You know, actually, I think I already talked about this a little bit. You know, if you want to include everybody, which is probably the best idea, I think 12 probably is a pretty good place to start because I think at that point you can get a better feel of maybe who might belong, and you can kind of pick and choose, I think, who you think should be there. I don't know about the buys either. I mean, that means you get 4 teams that are going to have maybe would that make them for sure a home team? I don't know. Understand the whole. Or does that mean that they all advance to like because I thought they were going to include bowl games in those somewhere.
They don't have to play. They have a bye.
Well, I know, but I mean, as far as I don't know that necessarily gives them a home field advantage, does it? I thought that the bowl games were kind of in there too.
Well, the first round would be played on campus, but that would not involve the teams that have buys.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the teams with the buys still, I think would have to, we talked about the advantage that a home field gives, and I don't know that either one of us know for sure exactly how much that is, but like with Florida playing Utah, I mean, they didn't play in Utah, so to me it's like not even a valid point because it's like, yeah, they might, played in Utah, you probably get, that might even be true, but I don't really, that's not how I really look at it. I'm like, well, if they'd have played in Utah, then we'd be talking about a different game probably, but I don't know that, I don't know that necessarily means that Utah does win. I mean, I don't know that it's that simple that you can say, okay, well, put the game in Utah. That's a guaranteed win for Utah. I'm not so sure that's really fair.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe it is. I mean, maybe it does change it. But That's not how I look at it, though.
They didn't play in Utah. They
Well, I
played
mean,
in Florida, and
that
Florida
changed
won the
anything.
game. That's all we know.
Well, yeah, that's kind of my point. It's like
Anyone who says that Utah would definitely have won the game in Utah is a fool. It's
well,
just
no,
stupid.
saying
I understand the opinion. There's nothing wrong with having an opinion and saying, I believe that Utah would have won the game at home. There's absolutely, I see nothing wrong with having an opinion and saying my estimation would be that if Utah played Florida at home, that they would have won the game. I have no issue with, but saying there's a 100% guarantee that Utah would have won the game at home, that's foolish.
Well, no, I think the point is because they didn't convert at the end, and they would have done it at home. You know, they would have had that momentum or whatever you want to call it. The 12th
game would have been different.
Well, I don't know that it changes any. That's kind of my point. Is that home field advantage, whatever that is, but I don't know that there's a point that goes along with it. Is there 3 points, 2 points, something like that?
Well, my opinion, and I think this is fairly logical, is that home field can only be calculated in a aggregate, meaning in general terms, you can say, well, based on thousands and thousands and thousands of results and putting these various equations into it, we've determined that home field is generally worth 3 points. But for any specific game, we don't know what it's worth. It could be worth 10 points one game. It could be worth nothing another game. It varies on matchups and where the game's being played. There are home field advantages that are enormous. LSU Death Valley versus playing at Colorado State. So we can't say what home field advantage is worth in any particular game. We can say over the course of all these other games, yes, it's generally been determined it's worth about 3 points, but that doesn't mean it's worth 3 points in every single game.
Well, to me, again, and my ideas kind of are way out in the field, and I apologize. People don't always agree with what I say, and I don't know that I even blame them. But, to me, if there's that big of a difference, that's a problem. If there's like actually a 3 point advantage to playing at home or not playing at home, to me, that's like saying there's something that's maybe not being done properly. Because I would think, a team generally, I don't know, they're going to strategize for where they are. They're not going to. Yeah, maybe they don't have to. Maybe there's things that they don't have to address if they're, or maybe it's easier to play at home. I don't know. I've never had to do it. I'm not a player, but I don't know that it changes the. It shouldn't be like used as like a. Well, that means that they were saying that Utah was actually a better team because, Florida had to kind of they had to pull out the whatever it was to at the very end, came down to a missed assignment or something like that, the pass drop or whatever. Well, that would have been probably a completed pass if they'd played in Utah or whatever. Or I don't know. I'm not saying that's what they're saying, but it's like that they wouldn't have failed if they converted if they'd have been at home or whatever. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it's ever been, maybe Florida plays tougher at Utah. I don't know that it changes anything. It's kind of my point.
I completely agree with you.
Well, they shouldn't even really bring it up.
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. It's like and then maybe if you play, sure, if they have to play again, maybe the fairest thing to do would be to play, okay, now we played them once in Florida. Now let's play once in Utah.
They are.
That would be the way. And then the playoff, if that's what you're talking about as far as seedings, if they both are in the playoffs, then yeah, maybe play that second game at Rice Eccles and let's see if that changes anything. But apart from that, I don't know that we need to really worry about what happened. It's pretty clear that Florida won.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's never going to happen is we're never going to see two teams play twice in one season, and one on one team's campus and the other time on the other team's campus, because we just don't play enough games.
Well, I thought you told me that the byes would allow for a home field.
So Utah and Florida are going to be playing again, but they're going to be playing next season in Utah with two somewhat different teams. So we can't equate what happened this year to what's going to happen next year. They're going to be two different teams.
Two different teams, but I mean, we can compare. It's kind of like Brigham. I mean, and I apologize to Tim if he's listening. He's going to hate me to do it, but he's like saying I'm a BYU homer or something. Like I'm not that way. Washington leads BYU all time 7-4. I'm just saying if you play in that game, the Holiday Bowl, maybe because it's almost like a home field advantage for BYU. I kind of think, and you might disagree, and I think you do disagree because I remember what you said about it, but I don't know that it's a guaranteed win for Washington just because Washington maybe had a better whatever defense or whatever it might be, or better offense or whatever. I don't know what that they did, but if they did,
I've never guaranteed anything that didn't actually get played.
No, in your summary of the 19.
This is what I did, Chris. This is what I did. Hang on. Okay, I started producing these videos about disputed national championships. And I would just lay it out there to say, this is why I believe this is a disputed national championship, because Team A was awarded by the AP and voted number one. But look at this other team or these 2 or 3 other teams and look at their resumes, look at their records, look at what they accomplished. And I believe that they are just as deserving to be awarded a national championship. I didn't say, number one, that the first team that was voted national champion should be stripped of their national championship and it be replaced with these other teams. Number one. Number two, I explained, I don't know if it was in that particular video, but at one point after doing a few of these videos, people wanted me to tell them who I think would have won the game.
Yeah.
And that's what I did in that video. But I said, that doesn't mean that Washington would have won the game. This is just simply my opinion. That doesn't mean that should be set in stone and marked in history as Washington beating BYU, because it didn't happen. It's just my opinion.
Well, there's nothing, I don't know that I really have an objection, except that it was like 14 or maybe even more. It's like either team would have beaten them by, it's kind of like, it was almost like, well, either team would have won by at least 14, maybe even more. I mean, that was kind of, come on, Mark, at least be honest. I mean, it was either team would have won by probably 14 on a, maybe an even, maybe not, if they played a neutral field or whatever. I mean, you put conditions. Well, no, you put conditions on it. I mean, it was like in a fair, neutral site game, either team would have probably beaten them by 14 or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, I disagree, because you got to kind of give BYU maybe the benefit. And I'm really not a BYU wonk, really. I'm really not. I was around then. I saw what happened. I know kind of how it played out. I was kind of confused why BYU was playing Michigan at the time. I was like 6-5 Michigan. Well, what, they couldn't find anybody any good? And then I remember watching the game and seeing how good Michigan actually was. I mean, make your own mind up about what that means. But then towards the end, I kind of figured out why they were playing Michigan, because that was probably as good a team as they could have hoped to play at that time. I mean, that's just the fact. But if you want to make it that they played a terrible Michigan team, I guess I don't know how true that is, but the results speak for themselves. I mean, how BYU would have done against Florida, I mean, I don't know for sure. I know in 1996, the only loss that BYU had in 1996 was to Washington. And that does matter. I mean, it's a way to compare programs is the way I look at it. And then they lost to them again the next year. So Washington beat them twice. But they didn't beat them in 1984, and they didn't beat them in 1985. I think they did beat them in 1986. Washington holds the advantage. I mean, if that's what it's all about, then sure. But, I don't know that we should say, well, just because Washington beat Oklahoma by 12 or whatever it was, that proves they were a better team. Well, I don't know that it really proves it. It proves that they were capable. Well, that's the way I look at it, All
right, Chris, anything else?
Well, yeah, there was one other thing, and it was Tim, I think, brought it up, but the transitive property, it's like, I just want to make a clarification on it, if it's okay. And I've already talked about it, but there is actually a pretty clear connection between 1983 through 1985 that runs straight through BYU. And it starts with Florida beating Miami. They ended up tying USC, who lost to Kansas. I think Kansas lost to Iowa State, who lost to New Mexico State, who lost to Tulsa, and Tulsa took it all the way to the next season to BYU. So make of that whatever you want, but it's a straight line from the 1983 national champion Miami to 1984 potential national champion BYU.
You know what I did last year, Chris?
Yeah.
I took the transitive property and I showed that Northern Arizona would beat Ohio State. Does anyone on this planet really believe that would have happened?
You're missing a key part of what I'm saying. I'm not just picking and choosing who advances. It started with Florida beating Miami, Florida. Then they tied USC, who lost to Kansas. Take it out. People don't want to look at it. They can call me a liar if they want. Kansas, I think, lost to Iowa State, who lost to New Mexico State. New Mexico State lost to Tulsa. Tulsa didn't lose again. In fact, they beat another team at the start of the 1984 season until they lost to BYU. I mean, that's just a fact. It's not me. It's not me. Cherry picking. Oh, I think here I'll use this one. Use this one. Use this one. It's a straight line, direct connection from 1983 to 1984. and it went followed through to 1985 to when BYU got beat by UCLA. UCLA got beat by Washington. So there you go.
Okay, here you go.
And then it ended with Alabama beating USC to win the belt.
Okay.
That's how it stopped. And you say, well, Alabama wasn't any good. Okay, whatever.
Oregon last season beat Ohio State. Stanford beat Oregon.
It's head to head. That's my point. It's head to head. It's not me saying, I think it's not me saying, well, I think this team's better than that team. It's the way it went. It's the truth.
Yes. Listen to this, Chris. If I can finish my statement, Oregon beat Ohio State last year. Okay. And in the same season, Stanford beat Oregon.
Overtime.
Cal beat Stanford. Arizona beat Cal. And Northern Arizona beat Arizona.
Yeah.
So Northern Arizona is better than Ohio State.
Well, that's not head to head, though.
Yes, it is. They were all head to head. They were all head to head.
All right. Well, at the end of the chain, yeah. At the end of the chain that you created, yeah, I guess so. Okay.
That's what I'm showing. That's what I'm displaying.
I'm not making a chain. I'm not making a chain. I'm just telling you what the results are. That's all I'm doing.
Any team that has lost any game in the country, we can build a chain to determine some kind of ridiculous result.
It's not what I did. I mean, you're kind of making a false accusation. I took a straight line. Mine's a straight line. It's not me saying, oh, here's a game I can use. Here's another game I can use. That's what the other people are doing. That's not what I'm doing.
Okay.
Well, I'm just being honest with you. I'm not doing that. But whatever.
You're doing something that's far more invalid, actually, and you're carrying it across seasons. Those are two different football teams.
Well, if you don't want to use it, then don't. But I just thought I'd share it with you because.
I don't.
Okay, well, you don't have to. You don't have to. You don't have to.
It doesn't make any sense to be saying that a team from a different season they cease to become that they cease to remain the same team.
We don't have to go to a different season, and I've used this one before, and I already told you about it. Tulsa beat in 1984 beat a 9-0 Indiana State team that I think had beaten Louisville, who had beaten Houston, Houston I think had beaten Southern Methodist. I mean, we already talked about all that, and you don't want to use that one either. But
Southern Methodist beat.
Well, Southern Methodist, they beat a lot of good teams that year, but they lost to Texas and Houston as the two teams they lost to, and Baylor beat Texas 24-10. And like I said, Tulsa, actually, Houston got beat by Boston College, and it was the next season that BYU beat Boston College. So you don't want to use that, I guess, but that's kind of where it's.
We're not using games in the next season because those are two different football teams. They're different teams.
Two different teams, but comparable as far as, where they are. But I agree with you halfway, kind of, sort of. I don't completely. And the other one I was going to tell you, Mark, and you've had an opinion about it. I think BYU should be credited with when they played Pittsburgh, and you can say, well, Pittsburgh sucked or whatever, because I think you have said that.
Yeah, they did.
I don't think they sucked at the time BYU played them. I mean, I don't think that's really a fair argument.
Why don't you believe that? That was the first game of the season. We don't know who they were at that point.
Number 3 in the AP, but I don't even know that really matters. I mean,
it doesn't matter. That's the point, that the Associated Press determined that a team was the third best team in the country, and they went on to go 3-7-1. So they obviously weren't the third best team in the country. They weren't even the 30th best team in the country.
Well, but they were good enough to tie Navy, and Navy beat South Carolina. Now South Carolina was undefeated when they played Navy.
Oh my word. We are going to.
No, that's just direct comparison. They were good enough to tie Navy, and Navy beat South Carolina. I mean, I don't know.
Again, I repeat, you can connect and make some absurd result out of any teams in the country as long as there are losses by those teams. The only teams that you can't touch are undefeated teams, but everybody else, you can come up with some absurd result of X beating Y based on some kind of chain.
I don't know why that's so absurd. South Carolina was on track to go undefeated until they lost to Navy. That was a big upset. I think Navy was only like 4-6-2 or something, or 4-7-1 or something. They weren't very good. Navy wasn't very good, but they still beat South Carolina. It's just something to think about, Mark. I'm not trying to push anything off on you. Just consider it.
I really, at this point, don't even know what I'm considering.
That was a big upset, Mark. Come on, be fair. When South Carolina got beat by Navy, that changed everything. They were in track to probably be the national champion that year. If they hadn't got beat by Navy, I mean, you tell me I'm wrong. Go ahead and tell me I'm wrong. I don't care. Go ahead.
I don't even know where we are in this discussion at this point.
Had Navy not beaten South Carolina, there's at least a fair chance that South Carolina might have won a national championship, but they didn't. They got beat by Navy. Upset them. It changed everything.
Yes, if South Carolina would have beaten Navy, they would have been undefeated, and they would have had to play probably. This is 1984. I don't know where they would have been assigned to play in a bowl game.
I don't either.
They could have been in the Sugar Bowl, let's say. They were not an SEC member. They were an independent, of course.
No, they're independent.
So,
well, they got beat again. Oklahoma State beat them in 21-14, I think, is Oklahoma State beat them.
Yeah.
They twice that year.
I watched the game. I remember it well.
Okay. Well, I'm just
Chris.
Thank you, Mark, and I appreciate your time. And I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving too.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I do appreciate your time, and I think you do a wonderful job.
Thanks, Chris. Call back anytime.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Let's get to these super chats before we pack up for the night. My goodness, we do marathon live streams on here, which I appreciate you guys being here. Lemansky, thanks for putting Tim and MVP on together. Must digestion for any football fan. Go Hawkeyes. Thank you for that, Lemansky. And that may do it. I don't want to miss any super chats. Oh, we've got Erica chiming in. This is what happens when everything is about money all the time. College football is not about football anymore. It's all about the Benjamins. Well, okay, I'm not going to get into that one, but yes, you are correct. However, let's understand that we can't take just the good and leave out the bad. It all comes together. So if you want to sit in your living room and watch television and watch college football, then it's going to create money and revenue. So you can't have both. All right. Anything else here? What have we got? We've got Ben. Ben, thank you so much for that. Thanks again for the great platform. Thank you for that, Ben. I appreciate you calling tonight. Then we've got Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob says, how about my Tulane Green Wave? Yeah, they've had a nice season, 10-2. We haven't played in a major bowl since 1949. In the aftermath of Katrina, a lot of folks did not think we could keep playing the sport. Willie Fritz for Coach of the Year. Yes, Tulane's been exceptional. They won, of course, against Kansas State earlier this season. They will be playing in the conference championship game at home. And we hope to preview all those G5 conference championship games. So all defenders of the G5 out there, I intend on previewing all the conference championship games in the G5 this week. And if we ever get done with this live stream, I'm going to do a top 25 that actually makes sense. Yelly Belly, GBR, Rule versus Fickell, we'll see. Yeah. Good coaches coming to the Big Ten Western Division is a good thing for the Big Ten and a good thing for the Big Ten Western Division in particular. I believe that Matt Rule was a tremendous hire for Nebraska, really good, strong hire, but I think Wisconsin eclipsed it with Luke Fickell. Let's see. We also have Ben here. Appreciate that so much. Hashtag help Mark Cope funds. Please contribute. There it is. Hey, if that's going to build a decent fund for the channel, sure, we'll go with that. Ben is concerned about me. Ben is mighty concerned about me dealing with the loss on Saturday. Erica, can we not talk about football coaches anymore? It makes me sick. All right. Erica, thank you for being here. Everybody else, we appreciate you being here as well. Thanks for your contributions in any possible way. even if that's just like button. Just hit the like button. Do it for Erica. Hit it gently. Tap the like button and help us out here at the Voice of College Football. I am off to rank the top 25 teams in the country logically, reasonably, sensibly. The top 25 that actually makes sense out late this week because of here we are. All right. Appreciate you being here. And then don't forget that we've got our College Football After Dark show tonight, starring a cast of thousands, but most notably, you got Exploring with Ben and Tim and Tony and Rick and all sorts of good people on there. So College Football After Dark tonight on the main channel, 10:45 Eastern time. And then I'll be back for the Nebraska show, for a call-in show, and for the USC show. The USC show, when you've been talking for 4 hours, that's what happens. For the USC show at 11 o'clock Eastern time, 8 Pacific, to preview the Pac-12 championship game with Matt Zemek. All right. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for all your support, and we will see you on Monday.